And if anybody else is preparing to speak for public input at the council's committee meeting, one of these yellow cards on the back is what you can fill out and pass it up to our city clerk, Phyllis Clark, here at your left. At this point, we will call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. And if the clerk can call roll.
Mr. Bowersox.
Present.
Mr. Garrick.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Ms. Marlin.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Smythe.
Here.
Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mayor Pressing.
Here.
Okay, all here. Next, we have any additions to the agenda? Yeah, David.
I just wanted to say we had considered that since probably today we will not be going forward with the ordinance on criminal nuisance properties and criminal trespass, blight tenants, invited guests as written, we'd considered actually dropping them from the agenda today, but a lot of people have come by to give us their thoughts on both of these, and so I think we probably should leave them on the agenda, but just let people know that both of these are going back into the oven for redrafting. At least the form that you see it is not going to be moved forward now, and the plan is that we'd like to get input and come back to it again early next year. So with that, I'd like to say, let's leave the agenda as it is.
Charlie?
And I would like to add that I just sent around via email a draft of a version of the criminal nuisance ordinance that I think takes the best of our language and the best of the Champaign ordinance and combines them for a little more clarity based on the input that we've gotten over the last couple weeks. So I will be seconding or making motions to send both those items to back to staff and to future committee meetings when the time comes.
Okay. Any other additions to the agenda? Are there any staff reports tonight? Yeah, okay, we have one from Dr. Libby Tyler, Director of Community Development here.
This is an announcement from the Urbana Business Association. It's for Uptown Fridays, late night shopping in Uptown Urbana. That will be this Friday, November 13th from 5 to 8 p.m. A lot of the shops and restaurants, galleries will be open late this evening, and there will be an atmosphere for shopping and hanging out and entertainment, and there's more information available at urbanabusiness.com.
Great, thanks. Dennis?
I'd like to take this opportunity to let everybody know that the City of Urbana, in cooperation with the University of Illinois, is sponsoring its second annual Come Alive concert. And this is a celebration of the African American culture and arts in our community. As you know, we did the first celebration last year about this time in November at the Levis Center, and we had a very excellent turnout, and we had a lot of fun. There was music, performance, visual artists, and free food. And we had so much fun, we decided to make it an annual event to highlight the African American members in our community and their artistic endeavors. And so we're going to be holding it again. It's going to be on Saturday, November 14th. This coming Saturday between 2 and 4 o'clock at the Levis Center, which is on Illinois Street on the east end of the campus. There will be a variety of people who are performing, including CU superstar Ron Bridgewater and the Pickup Jazz Quartet. Ted Atkinson is going to do a dramatic spoken word called the America's 14th Colony. Sean Hayes and the Mount Olive Praise Dancers will perform. And Candy Foster and Shades of Blue will end the program. We have visual artists including Jason Patterson, Michael Sherfield, Jesse Knox, and Carol Elliott. And we have also a display of 3 tripart panels that we have gotten from the Early American Museum in Mohammed, and this is part of the Doris B. Hoskins collection, and was supplied to us by the director of the museum, Cheryl Kennedy. And this features, in written and pictorial manner, the history of many of the people in the black community over the last 100 years. So we're very pleased to have this event, and we invite everybody to come. Again, it's free to the public between 2 and 4 on Saturday at the Levis Center, and there will be a buffet of soul foods available to you. So please do come.
Thanks.
And here's the
Diane.
poster.
There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Diane?
Just wanted to remind the council and public that tomorrow, Tuesday, November 10th, from 4 to 6 p.m., there's going to be an open house at the Stone Creek Church, corner of Race and Windsor. This will be with Ameren IP, and the purpose of the open house is to address residents' concerns about power outages in South and East Urbana. And people can come anytime. Representatives of the power company will be on hand. And again, we can get answers to questions about why the outages are occurring and what the power company is doing to address them.
Got something very simple. If you're interested in supporting the arts community in Urbana, you might remember that a couple of weeks ago I mentioned that Paul Wirth of the Iron Post had won the ACE Award for sponsoring live music, and the band I mentioned having seen at the Iron Post as the cutting edge of rock and roll ukulele, the Duke of Ukes. Well, it turns out that there's actually a contest going on for the Chicago Blues Festival, where they're taking votes for bands to see who actually gets a chance to perform. And the Duke of Uke, which has, by the way, Urbana's arts coordinator, Ann Hochwalder, as saxophone, tenor sax, yeah. They are now narrowly in 6th place. Unfortunately, only the top 5 can make it. So if you're looking for something that will just take a little time and no cash, if you can go to cbbfestival.com/contests, you can vote once a day from now to the 15th and see if we can push the Duke of Uke into the top 5 and let Chicago have a chance to hear what we've seen, the future of ukulele rock and roll, and it works, and it's time to share it with the rest of the country.
Thanks. Any other staff reports? Okay. Hearing none, we have minutes from the previous meeting, the October 26th meeting. Are there any corrections? A motion by Heather.
Second.
Seconded by Robert. Any corrections or changes? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Next, we have public input time. I have quite a bit of public input tonight, so I will try to keep everybody to 5 minutes. If you can make your presentation as brief as possible, and also if folks have come as a group, if you can kind of pick who's going to speak for the group and convey your message and not repeat things other people have said, but when you come to the podium, say the new things that are in addition. Some people have asked to speak here at this public input session, and then other public input will come on the topic number 8, which is really the 4th agenda item about the criminal nuisance ordinance. And I'll give everybody a 1-minute warning before your 5 minutes are up. And just to reiterate what David said, I think it's likely the case that this will go back to the drawing board. So I think the most helpful input on the criminal nuisance ordinance piece for those people who've come to speak about it would be to really specifically say what sections and what changes you'd like to see in the ordinance so that we can take all that input into account. And I'm so glad a lot of people have come and also put things in writing. And we want to take all this input and fold it into an updated version of the text. So with that, of the people who wanted to speak here, before we get down to the specific item, first we had Maria Ryan from Buena Vista Court, and then on deck, Esther Pat. Maria? Yeah, you can come on up to the podium, and the little black thing in the middle is the microphone, if you speak into the mic. Tell us your name and address for the record, and then you have 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Maria Ryan. I live at 1 Buena Vista Court in Urbana, and I'm here to address you with regard to the landlord-tenant ordinance. I think there are a few of you here who remember back far enough to know that I was the person who originally brought the landlord-tenant ordinance to the floor back when I was on city council. And it was very much in the spirit of ensuring that people, regardless of whether they paid a mortgage for their home or whether they paid a rent check for their home, that that was still their home and that they had the appropriate rights that are usually accorded to people in their homes. So I am here to speak very strongly in favor of an amendment to that ordinance prohibiting landlords from including clauses in their leases that would allow the landlord to ban the invited guests of a tenant. And just as kind of a benchmark in your thinking, I would recommend thinking in terms of whether you would allow a banker to do that to somebody who is paying a mortgage on their home. And if the answer is no, then I would very much encourage you to support the amendment. Regardless of what happens with the nuisance ordinance, I think the landlord-tenant ordinance could probably do well with that amendment in it.
Thanks, Maria. Any questions? Thank you very much. Okay, next, Esther Pat, and I might have made a mistake. Actually, you might have wanted to speak at the time. That's better. Okay. Ruth Wyman, did you want to speak now or at the time? Okay. Right ahead. Okay, perfect. Then the only other person who wanted to speak now, I believe, was Michael First of 802 North Broadway. Your turn is up on the topic of the Menards store, I believe. So if you tell us your name and address for the record, you have 5 minutes. You've brought more paperwork to the meeting than we. Oh, okay, it wasn't all a stack of papers. I thought it was a whole stack of papers.
Oh, no.
More than we had.
No.
Go right ahead, Mr. First.
My name is Michael First, and I live at 802 North Broadway. And I'm concerned that we don't yet have a Menards store in Urbana. And I have reason. It seems to me that maybe Menards is beginning to think that we in Urbana are a bunch of bozos. And I won't use that word anymore. In July, I emailed Mr. Tom Carino, who's, I guess, the economic development manager, and I asked him what explanation has Menards given Urbana for the delay in building its store here. And Mr. Carino emailed me back that Menards has indicated to us that due to the slowdown in the economy, they are not building any new stores. So I did a little work and I snooped around the internet, and I found out that in 2009, Menards has opened up new stores in Waukesha, Wisconsin, Escambanda, Michigan, Ontario, Ohio, Sandusky, Ohio, Warsaw, Indiana, Columbia, Missouri, and Massillon, Ohio. And so it leads me, for some reason, Menards has put us on the bottom of their list. I don't know why. Menards first bought this land, to do this in 2005, and they did quite a bit of engineering work at the time, but then everything seems to have stopped. So something has gone wrong, and we have been put on the bottom of the list. So either if Menards told Mr. Carino that it's because of the economy, it's because of more than the economy. Menards must have been lying to us, or Mr. Carino was lying to me. And I don't really know the answer to that question. And there was a few more subsequent emails between Mr. Carino and I, and all of these were forwarded to Ms. Tyler. And I assume the mayor must know about them also, but I don't know for certain. And in one of the last emails, Mr. Carino wrote to me, the city administration and council have been supportive of the project, and Menards has acknowledged that support. Again, this has been quite a few years, and so if indeed Menards has given us any recent assurances that they're truly interested in this, written or otherwise, I would have expected that either the mayor, Mr. Carino, or Ms. Tyler would be more than happy to announce them to everyone. But this hasn't happened. So I'm still concerned, and I hope these three individuals can provide, the people of Urbana with answers about this. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Mr. First? Charlie has one question.
Mr. First, what would be significant to me is whether Menards began construction on any properties since the economic downturn last year. It's one thing to open stuff that you're in the process of doing, but in your research, did you find anything that suggested they started work on new buildings towards the end of 2009? Or towards the end of 2008, after all of the financial stuff hit the fan?
I can't answer that question. I don't.
Okay, and similarly, has anything started this spring?
I don't know. But guess what? I might look into that.
That's the real question. I think that's the question we need to be asking.
Well, I mean, but my point here is that, you know, the construction of these stores must have, you know, probably that are opening in 2009, certainly started right before the economic downturn occurred. And the planning for those stores occurred, certainly goes back to at least 2005, when Menards had bought the land in Urbana. So I'm still concerned that Urbana appears to have ended up on the bottom of Menards' list. And this is the concern. And you know, and I think having like it's a perfect place for a store, and you know, and it almost seems that these other places cannot be as desirable locations as Urbana.
Oh, Mayor has a question.
Mr. First, did you say Urbana was a desirable location?
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your input. Okay, that is the end of, I think, the public input for the beginning of the meeting. I know lots of other people had filled out a card to speak at the time of, mostly of the criminal nuisance ordinance. So we will move on to a presentation this evening about the stormwater utility fee, brief case study from the town of Normal, and Bill Gray, the Director of Public Works, is here to introduce this.
Thank you. It gives me pleasure to introduce to you Mike Hall. Mike is the Public Works Director for the town of Normal. And before he gets started, I just want to do a little background. In July of this year, Gail Jamison, Brad Bennett, and myself made a presentation before you to just explain, you know, what all is a stormwater utility? What are the responsibilities and roles that Public Works has with respect to managing stormwater in the city? And kind of went over a broad scale of what those responsibilities are and currently what the budget is and the funding sources for that, and suggested that one way to help provide the necessary funding to really manage the system and address the needs and shortfalls that we have would be via a stormwater utility. There's been several that have occurred over the last several years in the state of Illinois and quite frankly throughout the United States. And I heard Mike's presentation earlier this year, and the town of Normal's experience, first of all, it's a community kind of our size, so it's a fairly equal population type scenario. But the process that was used and the experience to getting there I thought was quite interesting. I thought it would be helpful for you all to hear firsthand, and Mike was gracious enough to come here and do a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to kind of walk us through how Normal was able to implement such a stormwater utility.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Again, what I'm going to be able to present to you, like I say, you've had a pretty good description. Forgive the slide or the PowerPoint presentation just a little bit, because it's one I've been using for a number of different groups, and so it may get more basic about the utility than what Bill has already described to you. But what I'm going to go through is just the experience, how Normal went through the entire process. And if we got time, and I don't know if your agenda will allow it this evening, but it will give you an opportunity maybe that I can answer some questions on some of the pitfalls and some of the good things that happen when you go through this process. Getting started, I kind of boiled this down to five steps. This is kind of the way we attacked it. We didn't do this alone. We actually contracted for some professional services early in the process. This was back in, well, soon after, in fact, that the new NPDES, or the National Pollution Discharge Elimination permits, had to go into effect in 2003, we found that we had some additional financial burden to the town for implementing some of the permit requirements. And so we started to look already as to maybe some alternate funding sources to implement those things. So we started this in 2004. We actually contracted with a local firm, Clark Dietz and Associates, to do a feasibility study for us. It was a $32,000 study, and from that study, it kind of led to the four remaining steps that they kind of encouraged us to proceed with on implementing our at least getting approval for and implementing our utility. Some of the key things, of course, to this is, of course, stakeholder input, resident input, a number of different stakeholders, including neighborhood associations. We're fortunate in Normal that we do have an umbrella neighborhood association called NAN, Neighborhood Associations in Normal, real original, but it was a good place that we could get some very good input. Also, some representative businesses, not only from our uptown area, but also in our strip development areas, other organizations, and churches. The other key of course, was to meet with your key potential rate payers. And when I say key rate payers, what we would consider your high rate payers. In Normal, such as like Urbana, we have a very large state organization. It's knocking on our door, Illinois State University. And also Mitsubishi Motors of America, who are, of course, on our west side of town, were, of course, two of those very large potential ratepayers that we needed to deal with. Also, just going through, we went through and actually had somewhat of a cafeteria list of some financing or some funding alternatives for the utility. And then, of course, then the last step, of course, was to go through the process of approving an ordinance and implementing the utility. The first step, of course, the utility feasibility. This was kind of an internal study, first of all, for to actually come up with what the town felt, the town staff felt that were goals and objectives. And this could be somewhat different than what your stakeholders may find. But we also then went ahead and did a complete inventory of not only how we were funding current stormwater activities with, but also some of the problems and some of the needs and some of the places that we weren't, some of the things that we were not getting funded. Also in that feasibility study, they gave us an outline of how that would be, what was the equitable method for applying a new fee to property. And as I go later through here, I'll show you exactly what this ERU analysis is. The council then did receive, after that study, the council, of course, received a presentation from staff and the consultant on roughly in July of 2005. And we did receive authorization at that point to proceed with the further study or the implementation study in order to start the process for the utility. This process, of course, started off with stakeholder involvement. We actually, through identification of key individuals from those organizations and some input from the council, we actually formulated an advisory committee. Some of the duties that were assigned to that, of course, some of the information, of course, that was provided to that advisory committee was, of course, program costs, some program costs for both proposed and existing stormwater management plans. Of course, this was put together for public feedback, and it was, and actually the advisory committee worked with the council to establish the appropriate funding mechanism. We did receive a recommendation from the stakeholder group as to that funding recommendation, and we'll see what that is as we go through this. The makeup of the advisory committee is pretty critical. This is one of the most important parts, at least from our point of view, in going through this process. First of all, I mentioned Nan. That was key, because as we go through, we will determine exactly what portion of the whole utility is actually paid by what ratepayers. Are the residents actually the burden where the rate goes on to? Are the businesses? What's that breakdown as to how that's made? Churches were very important, not only churches, but all of your tax exempt stakeholders are important, because as you go through, there is a test for utility, and whether the test, of course, is to determine it is a utility or is it a tax, and that's very important. And of course, we had not only our Illinois State Universities, but we actually had other colleges, Lincoln College. We have some property from that's in Normal from Illinois Wesleyan. Also, your school districts. As I go down through here, you'll see that all of these stakeholders is that there's no property within the community that is exempt or was anticipated to be exempt from the stormwater utility, because they all contribute to the stormwater management plan, whether you are tax exempt or whether you're a state government or whether you're a local government or whether you are the city or the town. Because you will find that in order to make the test for the utility, you will find that you will need to pay that utility to yourself from other funds with facilities that you own. We started this process meeting with our advisory committee. There's some interesting ways in how you can get good input from your advisory committee. The time of those meetings, when you set them, we like feeding them because you get good return when you feed people. So we actually had lunch meetings. They could accommodate that in their business workday, and that was another thing that we tried to do. So we met 4 times monthly between December of 05 and March of 06. And in those 4 meetings, we kind of went through this process. We went through a process to come up with some policies that we thought that the management plan and the utility need to address. We discussed those. We drafted a statement based upon those discussions, and then we discussed the statement, and then we come to some kind of consensus on that statement. First of all, it was an education. The whole first meeting kind of took up as what is stormwater management? What does the town, what does the city do for stormwater management? So we had to, the staff explained that. We also went through what staff considered problems, needs, and goals. And then we also we had an opportunity for the stakeholders to go through some input as to what they perceived the town's problems with stormwater was and some goals that they thought we needed to have. We kind of went around the room, put them all up on the wall. Everybody had their idea up there, and then we went through a process to prioritize those goals and objectives. And then, of course, after that, then we actually took that back in the next meeting and come up with a program based upon those priorities. And then we started to go through and start to eliminate some funding methods. We actually had a punch list of funding methods that we discussed, and then we made a determination of what funding method would be best. And then the eventual is that the Stormwater Advisory Committee had a report that went to the council with a recommendation for the program. Just going to go through real quickly here. These are all, when we went for the existing program, the things that we were doing in Normal at the time. Some of these were things that we were just getting off the ground associated with the new MPDS Phase 2 permit, such as erosion control enforcement. We were thinking about drafting an ordinance, but we did not have the staff at that time to enforce the ordinance, and that was a need that we had for the utility when we talked about it. And of course, all the other things associated with the MPDS Phase 2 permit public education. These are the 6 controlling factors. This is in the legislation and the rules, so everyone has pretty much seen this. And then, of course, some of the issues that staff had, of course, regarding stormwater management. Some of these are kind of a hybrid. This slide here I put together is actually some of the things that came out of the discussion with the advisory committee. First and utmost first, of course, was protect public safety and private property, both. That was an utmost concern to them, and that, of course, was associated with flooding potential or flooding that was taking place on their property, and also what, if indeed new development was causing any increase in flooding or causing the flooding on that property. They were extremely concerned about that. And of course, meeting the new regulatory requirements of the NPDES Phase 2 permit, that was a staff thing. And then just keeping up. I had, when I had presented this idea of a stormwater utility to my council, I had a slide presentation where I and some staff members went in our entire stormwater network and took some, what I call the pretty pictures of the system. They were not impressive, okay? They were kind of an eye-opening experience for them, and some of the things that were happening out there that we had really no resources at that point to address with. A lot of those had to do with open waterways. Again, like I said, I described the process that we went through each meeting, or the second meeting, to identify their issues. And then we asked them to pick their 5 strongest or their most important issues that they had on their mind, so that we could have some way to determine on establishing or preparing our policy statements. Well, these are the statements. There are 4 of them that came out of the advisory committee. The first one, of course, was this. We wordsmithed this mission statement, and again, public health, safety, and the environment were of course the utmost importance, not only to lives but it also went to private property. We had consensus that the town must have a dedicated source of revenue from which to fund its stormwater management grant in order to meet the program mission. And they had determined that it was the primary source of program revenue should be a new service charge. And I'll explain these a little bit more as we go. A system of credits will need to be implemented to provide non-residential customers the means to lower their utility bill in recognition of things that they do on their property that reduces the burden to the public system. And there are some things that they can do: stormwater detention, stormwater quality measures, those type of things. They should get credit for that against that fee. Also, they determined that there should be a single flat rate charged to owners of single-family properties, and this had to do with the cost of the utility. As the billing becomes more complicated, the higher the cost is to the utility to perform that billing. So we did some statistical analysis and found that a single family residential unit, and that's what that ERU is, that's equivalent residential unit, was determined, and that we could bill those out all at the same rate. Well, why a user fee? These are some of the reasons that we used in explaining why we went with a fee. One of the major ones, of course, and it's prevalent today in most municipal budgets, of course, is the prevailing priorities competing for general fund dollars, and of course shrinking general funds also. we found that also not only did the general fund, we weren't able to get priority in our general fund for stormwater activities, but also in our sanitary sewer, which is, of course, our sanitary sewer fund, of course, is a demand-based funding. It's based on drinking water usage at that point, and how do you equate drinking water with the amount of runoff coming from a property? There's no direct correlation, so very difficult to and also from a billing point of view, if somebody turns off their water and they shut down their utility bill, how do you bill for the stormwater, which still continues to happen? So some of those things that we found that the current funding was not adequate to handle. And of course, some of the direction, and you've probably seen a very chart similar to this, but when you're looking at a user fee as compared to tax-based fees, of course, you've got all of the roller coaster ride that you have with taxes, sales tax, property, sales tax, income tax, that type of thing. We found that you might have a planned program that hits those peaks in that revenue, but basically the only thing that you really that happens is you end up at the bottom. This is the only way that you can truly fund these programs out of a tax-based system. We used a little acronym here. Reliable, level of funding, not subject to multiple demands, adequate, program-driven funding. You've got to come up with a budget and then you back out the fee. Flexible, and that, and then of course equitable based upon the demand that they placed on the program. This is directly related to the property. Typically, when we look at how we determine this, typically generate about $20 to $50 per acre per year, and that's in a range. Usually, and this was a figure that was given by the industry that we used when we presented the utility to our advisory committee and also to our council. Impervious area. How do you come up with that equivalent residential unit? And what you do is you do a statistical analysis of your single-family residential properties, and you calculate an average imperviousness on that lot. And of course, impervious area, of course, is your rooftop, your driveway, your sidewalk, anything that is hard surfaced that generates near 100% runoff. And you measure that according to square footage, okay? And when we did it in normal, we, of course, this analysis, we take this, of course, from aerial photography, and we actually calculate, in normal, roughly we have about 14,000 parcels in the town of Normal. We took about a 10% statistical on residential properties to come up with an ERU of about 3,200 square feet in Normal, and so that's what we determined our ERU at 30. Now, this could be different from Urbana. It could be different from any other community, and that analysis to come up with that number is not that difficult and probably should be done. When we calculated that, we broke down, of course, to based upon zoning classification to get an idea of what, by percent, who are the potential ratepayers here, who would be paying this rate, okay, and how we would assign a flat rate to that ERU. Now, for anything outside of a single-family residential property, we actually had to go through a process beyond that and determine exactly how many ERUs, equivalent ERUs, would be applied to higher usage property, such as multifamily, industrial, commercial. And we had this kind of breakdown in Normal as to who would be paying, what part of the population or part of the properties would be paying this utility. Of course, you can see single-family residential just a little under 30%, with some pretty good sized percentages for manufacturing and business. Now this makes sense because these are higher rated impervious areas in the town, and they should be paying a higher percentage of the cost. In order to meet that test, of course, for a utility also and not a tax, is that it still has to be determined that this is still a voluntary payment. Voluntary by the property in that they have an option to reduce their utility bill in some physical way that reduces that management burden on the city. And of course, how do we measure what are those credits? What impacts are there to the management system? Of course, and these of course are the ones water quality. What are you doing to clean the water? Runoff control, runoff volume control. That would be for flood control from property, and then also peak runoff rates. Peak runoff rates have associated with degradation or the acceptance or the ability for a downstream waterway to accept that rate adequately. And the credits work this way. It's a direct reduction of your service charge, and it's applied after the service charge is calculated. There's a calculation made for every property. It must be applied for, and it needs to be demonstrated. There is a little calculation that needs to be made. Some of it for large sites does require some engineering in order to provide us the information to make it eligible for a credit. And if you want to take a look at it, this is online. Not only is our utility ordinance online, but also our credit manual. Now, of that 14,000, just some information regarding our utility. So far, we've been, the utility went into effect, first billing started in June of 2006, and we are currently generating about $1.7 million a year in utility fee. It has funded new positions for management of our stormwater utility. It's provided a lot of new programs. It has paid some new capital projects for stormwater related. We did not create a whole new organization with that utility. These were, of course, a lot of staff that's paid through the general fund, so there's a lot of there's fund transfers into the fund, but they have to be justified according to those programs. 1.7 million a year, and right now it's probably the most stable fund that we have in the town at this point. So now I've spent 20 minutes or so. If there are any questions, I would be very happy to answer them.
Yeah, okay. Well, Charlie, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, Ms. Terrell, thank you very much. It's good to see that there's a way to systematically go about and figure out how to do this and do it right. I guess one of the things that first popped into my mind, and it's probably addressed by your credit program, is businesses and other properties with their own stormwater detention basins and systems like that. So does all that get calculated into your credit program? It can. They would have to apply for it. When we first started the program, we actually gave them, we calculated and sent out this, again, we did it on a bill saying that this isn't the charge, but this is what we're going to charge you, okay? We actually gave them a whole year at that point, in which case if they came in with a credit application that was approved, we would actually, even though they started paying it in that first year, we would actually rebate that back to them just for the first year only, okay? So that if indeed we were charging them a utility, we wanted that charge to start happening right away. But if you have actually had a credit, and you could, if you made that application and got approved in that first year, you could get your reimbursement. Okay. Now, one of the things I heard discussed about in doing this would be to give homeowners a credit for, say, stormwater barrels, rain gardens, that sort of thing. But you seem to Do you give your residents?
We do have.
Oh, you
There
do?
is
Okay.
actually a flat, credit. It's a small credit, but there is a flat credit associated with single-family residence. If indeed we have, you're able to demonstrate that you have a rain garden. We don't get full credit for those, of course. You can't totally eliminate it,
Right.
but there is a small credit.
Okay, but not for rain barrels then, or?
We have not had any credit applications for rain barrels yet.
Okay. And then I
wait
guess
for my
my
first
my
one.
last question then is what about a business that might be located right on, say, a creek or something, and discharges all of their stormwater directly into that creek?
Then they get they would pay the full fee, of course. And if, again, they're not making any type of directly into the creek, well, that's part of the system. They would be they would be eligible, or they would be required to pay the full fee unless they are making some kind of reduction or accommodation of stormwater on their site. But if they're just turning everything loose and it's going, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They pay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
they pay. Okay.
They pay.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, everybody, at the same, like I say, everybody pays, including Illinois State University. They pay. The churches pay. The town, we pay ourselves. There is no property exempt from the utility except through credit.
I guess, the city owns all the streets. Do you pay then for streets?
No, street right-of-way is incorporated. Actually, the way when you go to calculate a street, okay, that's the runoff associated with the street is already public burden because it's publicly owned at that point.
Okay.
So it's not calculated into the utility.
Okay, thanks.
That's right, not public right-of-way.
Okay. Mayor Pressing, and then I saw Diane's hand too. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. We went to a talk with the Park District about new ways of dealing with stormwater. And this gentleman was saying that there's a lot of creative things going on in Iowa and other states. And I wondered, are you still using the traditional method that you would just have this go into pipes in the street and then go to wherever your storm outlets are? Or are you trying the new kind of techniques? Because he was saying that detention ponds are passe at this point. So.
Yeah, well, again, our credits, actually, we work through the credit manual for invention at this point, for new methods. We're always opening to new best management practices. If you can demonstrate that what you're doing will reduce the burden to the town, whether it's from a water quality point of view or whether or not it's the flood issue now. So we have seen university actually, Illinois State University actually has implemented some projects on some of their sites, such with bioswales and some different methods of handling their discharge. Yes.
I just wondered if the city itself was using different methods.
We have started to use some we actually have a demonstration project in our uptown redevelopment area that we actually applied some stormwater utility funds to construct. But up there is a demonstration, there's a water feature, in which we're using reclaimed stormwater from an old storm sewer that we turned into a cistern, and it's used to circulate into it's a fountain, but it's also a bog. It's some other things that has to do with water quality, okay? And so it's a demonstration that we're moving that way. We have had in some of our stormwater pumping stations that we've had to rehab, we have actually put in some stormwater cleaning mechanisms in there, and they're mechanical. I mean, there's not a lot of room for building, nice greenway type of improvements there, so we've had to implement some mechanical ways to get that stormwater clean. But yeah, we are starting to implement. That's the whole idea behind the utility also, is that it gives you a little flexibility to use some money for some new things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Diane and then Robert. Diane?
Can you give us an idea of what a range of expense to a residential homeowner would
Got to
be
tell
in
you
the
that,
apartment,
yeah.
and maybe a multifamily building as well?
We determined that our ERU, okay, was charged at $4.60 per month, okay?
For a single family?
For a single family, $4.60 per month.
Was it the same for an apartment unit?
No, it's not. We do a complete analysis, and we apply an equivalent ERU number, multiple ERU units to that particular site. Okay. And so a property, a multifamily property owner would pay that times however many ERUs are assigned. It could be 20 ERUs, it could be 50 ERUs times that $4.60.
And have you found that having this fee in place changed new planning, for example, and new developments? They're trying to put in less impervious surface, or
Some.
Has it changed the city's way of thinking about what their minimum requirements are for parking lot size and that sort of thing?
Yes, it surely has. That's one element. There are a lot of things that we have, factors that go into changing certain things like parking lots and street widths and things like that. Stormwater being one of those factors, but there are other things too. Yeah, it sure has. Our landscaping requirements, handling of stormwater from surface parking lots. We are moving toward impervious pavers and impervious concrete for that first flush. It's called first flush cleaning. It's that first part of the rainstorm that's the dirtiest, okay, on a surface, and being able to get that first flush clean before it goes into the open waters.
Okay, Robert, and then Dennis. Robert?
Just curious, have you had have you seen anyone using the technology for recharging, for example, the aquifer, for example?
We haven't had anybody. Well, excuse me. Illinois State University has used some bioswale, and it has more to do with cleaning than recharge because they're limited in size at that point. For recharge of groundwater, for that to be effective, particularly, you have to. You start very small, but you got to be fairly good size, fairly large with those kind of improvements. We have changed some things associated with particularly how we deal with landscaped areas. Bermuda grass and short grass, manicured grass, of course, and the way that those soils are compacted, of course, create all runoff at that point and don't help that recharge issue. So there's some movement abreast. We haven't seen a lot of those projects yet, but again, we've really only had the incentive in our ordinance since 2007, and of course 2008 and 2009 have not been high developed. We don't see a lot of development taking place these days like we had before. So we are seeing some retro. We're seeing some demonstration projects. In fact, we have some funded through our stormwater utility on some demos projects associated with groundwater recharge also. Also something, too, in our stormwater environment is we went ahead and we've been involved in some total watershed planning also, not only just within the corporate limits of the town, but also the town now is developing into some watersheds that feed our sister cities' water supply, Lake Bloomington and Evergreen Lake. We're now seeing development take place in those watersheds. So part of those watershed plans have some projects that we need to implement in order to protect those water bases.
Dennis.
Oh, thanks for your presentation. I was wondering about, first, maybe the need. Did you have a lot of serious flooding in certain areas that initiated this project? Is that what was the emphasis to this? And secondly, after you initiated it and you announced that there was going to be this new utility in town, what did you do? What was the response of the homeowners, and how did you educate them? Did you have an educational plan to introduce this?
Yeah, we did. Actually, we did. We before, of course, after we had gone through the advisory committee process, those were pretty well publicized. Their presentation to the council, of course. Then also, we actually sent out at least 2 billing cycles before that utility was, and then we actually had notifications in those bills indicating that a new fee was coming. And of course,
This is on a water bill now?
this is on the water. Our utility bill would be the water bill, okay? We actually bill for water, sewer, waste services, and the district, the Water Reclamation District also bills on that same utility bill. So we actually put notification at least 2 billing cycles. We bill 6 times a year. That's a bi-monthly bill. And so they had, at least 4 months in advance of that the new utility, that they would be seeing a new charge. Of course, online, we actually had it on our public access TV also. There was a couple of spots on, we call it City Vision. We actually had some episodes there where we tried to get it out to the public also. So there was, and of course, there were objections, like any new thing. There were some calls. We actually had established a call center for the calls coming in. It kind of, our department in our town that takes care of the utility billing is our water department, and of course, it did require some phone answering staff to help them answer questions as they came in when those utilities, when people started to have to start paying that bill.
You own your water utility?
Yes, we own our water utility, yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Hall?
Oh, there was an event. We had a 100-year flood event on July 9th of 2003. We had significant flooding, not so much surface flooding, but the flooding that took place, of course, in addition to 7.8 inches of rain in a 2-hour period. We also had major power outages, and that shut down all the sump pumps in the town. So we had basements filling up with, and when a basement fills up with storm water or any kind of sump pump water, it goes into your sanitary system because it goes down that floor drain, and it surcharged the sanitary system. And also, and at that point, we had gray water coming back up into some basements also. So one of the most popular programs that we have with residences now through our storm utility is we have a overhead sewer service conversion grant program that they can apply for, which is extremely popular. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hall, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Next up this evening, we have these next 2 topics, I believe, will be briefer, and then we'll get to the topic that so many people have come for. Next, we have a report from the Civilian Police Review Board update for the 2nd quarter of this year from Todd Rent, our Human Relations Officer. Todd?
Good evening. I have submitted, based upon or pursuant to Section 1928L of the ordinance establishing the Civilian Police Review Board, a quarterly report showing all open and pending cases. In addition to that, you'll see that the report shows a little bit more. It also shows in your shaded areas the specific requirements of Section 1927A2. So I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Todd? Dennis.
Sir.
Well, thanks for your summary. This is very good to get this on a regular basis. I think we appreciate that very much. It's an important tool for us, and I think it lets the public know that we care about this issue. I'm not going to question the cases that are either unresolved or have been resolved, but my understanding is that you have an opening on the board itself. Is there an open position at this time?
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, we've sent out a notice for that. I've had Jolenda, our secretary, you may know her, send out the notice to our normal channels. I've also put a couple of feelers out, and we've actually announced it at both of our CPRB meetings recently that there is an opening for anyone who's interested in serving on the board. We'd love to get those applications in.
Any other questions for Todd tonight? Okay, thank you very much. Next, topic number 7 tonight is a report about tenant relocation assistance, an update from Dr. Libby Tyler, Director of Community Development.
Good evening. This is an update on a complicated and important issue that we first brought for discussion to the City Council, I believe, in June. And this was a topic that was prompted by some unfortunate incidences in the City of Champaign, the Village of Rantoul, whereby tenants were forced to leave their apartments or places of residence due to non-payment of utility bills by property owners. And since that time, we have worked closely on a task force with representatives of the City of Champaign, the Village of Rantoul, social service agencies, Cunningham Township, Housing Authority, the Tenant Union, and others. And here tonight, also members of the task force are Kevin Jackson from the City of Champaign and Esther Pat with the Tenant Union. And we had several others who worked with us on a series of meetings to put our heads together and respond to some of the concerns that were raised back in June. Some of the topics that we looked at are working with apartment owners and other agencies to identify likely housing locations, so that in the event of tenant relocations, we would be able to better assist tenants in finding new housing. We talked about developing triage procedures for the municipality and other social service staff to work with displaced tenants. We worked on preparing a service guide, quick service guide to work with the tenants and with caseworkers. We met with and worked with the various utility companies to get improved notice for pending tenant relocations and utility shutoff. We looked at a variety of possible legal and legislative solutions. And most importantly, we began to explore possible funding sources and vehicles by which the community at large could pool funding and provide funding assistance to tenants who need that assistance on a needs basis. And we looked at ongoing efforts to survey our affordable housing needs, and in particular our shelter needs. This staff report provides an update. There's still more work to be done. We did coordinate with local landlords through the Apartment Association. We put an ad in their most recent newsletter, and we will be following up with specific landlords and hotel owners to find those who might be able to assist the communities in these emergency relocation needs. I would point out that the Tenant Union does already provide monthly listings of low-cost housing. We provided those examples, and the Housing Authority has also been able and willing to assist tenants as their facilities allow. Triage procedures are attached. These were developed by a subcommittee of the task force and really provides a way for the municipality to provide assistance without reinventing a structure. And this was based on the system that was developed by Mr. Jackson and his staff during the Gateway Studios relocation, as well as some of the procedures that were used when the community worked together to assist victims of Hurricane Katrina. The Quick Help Guide was prepared by another subcommittee of the task force, and the thought here was, through the triage procedures, to have a very quick, focused guide that providers could work with tenants to help them get relocated and address immediate needs, such as finding movers, finding transportation, storage options, housing options, both short-term and long-term, immediate needs like childcare, food pantries. And we have an update on some other services that are out there to help tenants, including the First Call for Help service that's provided by Family Service, and a new statewide service that is just beginning in Illinois called 211. It's analogous to 911, and that's a way to obtain assistance through just a simple phone call. The utility notices and the warnings, we did meet with Ameren IP, Sanitary District, and the water company staff, and we were working through administrative procedures with all three companies to obtain at least a 10-day warning of non-payment. And this involves some cooperation in identifying, through the different data sets that are prepared, flagging vulnerable properties. And I do have to say that representatives of these three organizations were very cooperative, and we are already working together on these early warning systems. In fact, I did have a contact as most recently as Friday about a possible concern, and good thing about working together is that we can sometimes help get those bills paid, and indeed that was the case. And we have, since our last report, had another occasion to use this. I think this is an example where having systems in place so that we can communicate earlier, we can help prevent some of these situations from occurring. Legal review for our options are limited in some ways because it was seen that payment of rent and utilities by a tenant to a landlord is considered a contract. So for the city to insert itself and try to guarantee the use of those payments properly could be seen as interference with that contract. However, we do have some remedies through our proper ordinances and possibly including amendments to rental registration ordinance to tie required tenant notification or payment of utilities as part of that ordinance. And additional work will be necessary to further review those options. Finally, on the topic of providing tenant assistance funds, there are limited resources available in the community, but there is a lot of interest in expanding those funding resources. Through an agency such as United Way, we can work cooperatively towards fundraising efforts to apply these funds in a crisis relocation situation. We would like to apply these funds on a needs basis and with case management attached to ensure that the funds are applied most effectively. United Way was involved in our task force and very interested in creating such a fundraising group. However, in terms of the administration, we would look towards another agency such as the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, which can actually apply payouts to individuals. How would this funding mechanism be enacted? We would propose to enter into an intergovernmental agreement whereby we could pool our funds and use that new agency formed by the agreement or new program formed by the agreement to be a vehicle for those donations. And those donations could be from individuals in the community or could be as a grant recipient from other agencies. And I think if you followed the recent news about a Women's Place and the fundraising, as well as some of the other news just a month or so ago with Restoration Urban Ministries, we do have a community that wants to help, and it would certainly assist in having a vehicle by which the community and local agencies could provide this assistance. So additional work will be necessary to develop this program and the agreements and the funding mechanisms. I do note that there would be, we do recommend that we continue to use some of the city's own funds from our social service funding pool to assist tenants in the city as well, and to continue to add to that funding source as we can. An update on the affordable housing study has been underway with our consortium with Champaign, Urbana, and the county, and we are hoping to bring that study to a conclusion in the middle of 2010, and maybe looking for some assistance in completing that study as well. Part of the affordable housing needs study is taking a look at our shelter space, because we do have a deficiency in all types of shelter space. And I think we see that there is a reflection not just in the increase in these tenant relocation circumstances that have been occurring, but also in the sheer number of homeless in the community. And this is very sobering types of statistics, but just recently the Continuum of Care in our community completed a point-in-time survey. This was an additional survey that was done. Usually it's just done on an annual basis, and this showed a 20% increase in homeless in Champaign County in over the last year. And a copy of that survey summary is attached. So there are future steps to be taken, and we'll need to come back with additional progress on these steps. These are listed in the staff report, and some of the products of the group are attached to the staff report. And we would just ask that you review the report and provide any additional guidance to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. Any questions? Diane?
Thank you, Libby, and the task force for all the work you've put into this. I had a question. Are the people CC'd at the end of your report the actual members of the task force?
That's a pretty good listing. We did have a number of city staff involved as well.
Well, it struck me that there's no representative from organizations like the Central Illinois Apartment Association or the Hotel Motel Association or organizations like that that actually have members who own properties who could provide housing in a pinch. And I wondered, were they invited to participate?
We did outreach in that first task. We did outreach to these organizations and asking for their assistance, and we'll be following up with direct meetings and inquiries. We sent out the word, and now we're waiting for some responses, and we'll be following up with some individual meetings. Purpose of the task force was to organize a governmental and social service response to this issue, including outreach to the private sector.
So then the next step will be involve the community as well. Okay.
Any other questions? There are these 6 recommendations from staff about proceeding, so a motion would be in order to direct staff to proceed with those 6 steps and bring a report back when they're ready.
Well, if that's true, then I would like to make that motion because I think this is an important topic that certainly needs our attention. And one of the things I'd like to mention, too, in making this is that, yes, it looks like we do have it as a kind of a line item. I don't recall specifically, but you do mention that the City Council allocated a total of $2,000 to be used by the city in the event of the need to assist tenants in relocating as part of our consolidated social service funding, which is really good. Has any of that been tapped at this point?
Not yet at this point.
Okay.
And I think I heard a second from Robert. Okay. Mayor?
I would just like to say that the 2,000 was in the previous year's budget also.
Okay, that's good.
Any additional questions or additional direction from staff or for staff? Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks, Libby. Next tonight, we are at agenda item number 8. This is the criminal nuisance property ordinance. And first, Mayor Pressing is going to introduce the topic and sort of where this came from. Mayor?
Okay, thank you. This ordinance is intended to provide the city with a tool that is successfully used by many other cities, including Champaign, to prevent criminal activity from downgrading properties and their surrounding neighborhoods. By intervening at an early point in the process, we can prevent crime and the accompanying drain on public resources and the quality of life. Especially in this time of budget shortages, we need proven, cost-effective ways to prevent crime. The scope of this ordinance, it would cover residential and commercial property. While Champaign's ordinance covers only residential, we have found that criminal activity on commercial property can drive other businesses away and degrade the surrounding residential area. This type of ordinance would typically involve only 1 or 2 properties a year. And that is based on the experience of other cities that have it and our sister city of Champaign. Public input. This ordinance, as it is right now, is out of the Neighborhood Safety Task Force. With any changes have been marked on the ordinance itself. It incorporates suggestions from Urbana Council members as well as the members of the Neighborhood Safety Task Force, which includes representatives from every neighborhood association in Urbana, as well as representatives of landlords and tenants. We welcome specific comments on language and encourage public discussion. I've read some of the criticisms, and I'd just like to respond to a couple of things that keep recurring. One is the notion that there's this huge, broad application. And much of the criticism seems based on the incorrect assumption that this ordinance would be applied willy-nilly to dozens of properties. That has not been the experience of other cities, And the purpose is not to assess fines. The purpose is to engage property owners who have turned a blind eye to criminal activity and urge them to take corrective action and help them to take corrective action. The other misconception, I think, is that we somehow should have convictions first. And I believe that is ill-advised advice. We know of no city that waits years for a conviction before asking property owners to engage in abatement activities. And the city of Champaign relies on police reports first, not convictions. I do have, before you start the public comments, there are a couple of people that have commented. Kip Pope sent me an email, and he would like his guest commentary from the News-Gazette yesterday to be placed on file. He's not able to be here today, but he would like to participate. And I like the headline on his commentary. Urbana nuisance laws should be remedial, not punitive. That is our intention. And the Atkins Group has sent a letter, and I'll just read the beginning of it. The Atkins Group encourages the city of Urbana to increase efforts targeting negligent landlords harboring criminals or criminal activities. The proposed chronic criminal nuisance property ordinance developed by city staff is a step in the right direction. Then they list 5 topics that they would like to see addressed, and I would just like to deal with the first one. We will deal with all of them, but just for the sake of being brief. The first comment, and this, Mr. Atkins told me this himself, the existing human rights ordinance prohibits property owners from disqualifying tenants based on prior arrest or conviction record. Property owners are put in a catch-22 if the city ordinances prohibit from discriminating against and also penalized for leasing to tenants with past and ongoing criminal records. So a lot of people have brought up our human rights ordinance, and I would like Todd Rent, our human rights officer, to comment on how this ordinance is can be interpreted. And I've asked him to look at it, and he's done some research, and it's ongoing. So Todd, would you like to comment on this concern, or did he leave? Todd, you didn't leave, did you? Oh, well.
He might have stepped out.
Maybe he just stepped out. Well, when he gets back, maybe he can comment. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we will take public input now, and then council will get to discuss and debate. Again, I'll ask for everybody to keep their remarks brief to 5 minutes and to not repeat things if prior speakers had a chance to address. Oh, Todd is here. Todd Rent, if you do want to. Okay, we'll put you completely on the spot. Mayor, do you want to ask your question?
I'll repeat what I said. I read the Atkins Group letter, and their first concern, they support having some sort of an ordinance, but they'd like to see 5 points addressed. And their first one is the existing human rights ordinance prohibits property owners from disqualifying tenants based on prior arrest or conviction record. Property owners are put in a catch-22 if the city ordinances prohibit from discriminating against and also penalized for leasing to tenants with past and ongoing criminal records. And I said, while you were out, that you could offer us some interpretations of our ordinance, and I've also asked you to do some research on it, and maybe you could report on what you've found so far.
Sure. In terms of the statement, the basic statement that was provided of the, I guess, the explanation of the law, I believe that that is correct. If you look at this City of Urbana Human Rights Ordinance, prior criminal conviction, and I'm not recalling exactly the precise wording, but that goes to the core of the issue, is a protected class. And obviously housing is one of the areas, along with employment, commercial transactions, that is covered under the ordinance. So as a result, there is that protection for individuals who have previous criminal convictions. Now, in the context of employment, generally what you're looking for when you're enforcing this type of provision is whether or not there is a nexus between the job that is applied for and the actual criminal conviction. So the thing that I always bring up as a good example is, you know, you've got someone who has been convicted of retail theft who is applying for a job as a bank teller, or applying for a job as someone who's behind the counter at a convenience station, let's just say. That could be seen as a nexus, and you do the analysis and you determine whether or not there's a close enough connection that the business could put forth what would be considered to be a business necessity defense. And that is written in the ordinance. It's not the clearest of language, but it's pretty clear that there is that exception. In terms of housing, the discussion actually since I've gotten here is, well, first of all, you should know we don't get a lot of housing cases that actually come to charge. We talk about this a lot in the Human Relations Commission, mainly because if I get a housing case, it's generally because someone's been denied housing, they've been denied a lease. That's not something that I want to wait 30 days to get a response on, and that's generally something we try to jump on very quickly, try to get some type of informal resolution. And fortunately, we've been pretty successful in getting to that informal resolution and getting some people into leases, and we've at least been fairly successful in that. So we haven't had a lot of formal charges, and I look back over the history of the Human Rights Ordinance, and there just have not been a lot of formal charges for housing in general. When you narrow that scope down to housing based upon denial based upon criminal conviction, that I do not recall seeing one of those cases in our records. There may be. I went back pretty far, and I just didn't see it in the files. So as a practical matter, if we ever did receive that charge, and one of the debates in one of the conversations that we've had with legal staff is, is this something that is a qualified protection, which is if the landlord could show that there's a nexus between the individual's occupancy and their crime that was committed, whether or not we would enforce it based upon business necessity, or whether or not we would just say, no, there is a blanket prohibition, period, against looking at criminal background. And so to that end, in order to try and resolve some of that tension, I actually had talked to the mayor several months ago and more recently and talked about doing some research into other communities who have similar ordinances, and just to try and see how they've dealt with it. And one thing that I found very helpful was an article, actually, I'm sorry, it was model language from the Legal Action Center. It's a center that is a ex-felon advocacy center. It's a group of people who advocate for the rights of individuals who have been previously incarcerated. And they've actually come up with model language that tries to hit sort of a reasonable, narrow middle between these two extremes, and says, if you're going to deny someone housing based upon a prior criminal conviction, it has to fit into a certain range of convictions, number one. And then number two, if you're going to do it, there has to be a record-keeping mechanism so that if there is a challenge later on, my office can call, we can take a look at the record, we can see your reasoning, and make the decision based upon that. So it's that type of research that we're doing into best practices and the good public policy that I think we're trying to apply to this particular problem. But as such, we haven't had an actual case that's come before us with that type of fact pattern.
Okay, thanks, Todd.
I have a question.
Yeah, Heather, go ahead.
Can landlords even do a criminal background check in the city of Urbana? Under the Human Rights Ordinance, is that possible? Because when I read it, it doesn't look like we can. So that means to me that a convicted rapist could live next door to me if the people who live next door decide to rent their house out, that because they can't do a background check, that a convicted rapist or child molester could live next door to me and my 4 children. Something's got to change.
So to answer your question, when I've spoken, and I have had some conversations with landlords in this regard, one of the things that we encourage landlords to do is take a look at the permissible factors, such as credit rating, such as previous tenancy, getting those references, because 9 times out of 10, if you've got someone with that type of criminal record, you can look at the very clearly permissible factors and disqualify them based upon those, because typically someone who has been convicted in such a manner probably is not going to have the most stellar of rental histories. And so there are purely permissible reasons to disqualify that individual. To go to the question, reading the Human Rights Ordinance as it stands right now, I would agree that it is impermissible to look at criminal background in making that decision.
And actually, we should turn to public input before we do council debate here. So Todd, we might be asking you back for more questions as the topics go on. We have a stack of public input, and again, I'll call names and give people a warning of who's on deck. First, we have Joe Duchesne, and then on deck, Shirley Stillinger. Yep. We won't start the clock till you get up here, though. So Joe, have a seat. The microphone is the little black thing, so everybody can hear you even at home.
Thank you very much.
Tell us your name and address. And,
my name is Joe Duchesne. I live at 2017 Boudreaux in Urbana. I'm the general manager of Eastland Suites, the hotel out in North Cunningham, and I'm here to speak in regard to how this ordinance will affect hotels. There's going to be enough comment, I think, in regards to apartments and other private property ownership tonight, but specifically in regard to hotels. The hotels have been treated differently historically in regard to law. There's a whole world of innkeeper law out there that exists separate from other legal systems. There's also hotels have been treated differently code-wise, zoning-wise. There's just innumerable differences between hotels and a lot of other commercial property and other private property. And it basically tends to do with the nature of the occupant. It's a transient that lives in a hotel. It's not someone that typically is considered to be a resident or a long-term renter. They can, the transients 1 night to 30 nights typically, as determined by the city of Urbana in regard to their taxing codes. And in that nature, all it takes is a dollar bill and a signature on a registration card to determine whether one can stay in a hotel or not. It has nothing to do with, no one does criminal background checks, no one looks at, what people do, whether they're employed or not, whether they're, it has nothing to do with the nature of the person, and it's whether they can present money at the door, pay for the night stay, and leave. And in that sort of relationship, put me in a position as a manager or an owner of a property in a position of ownership that is criminalizing them for renting to someone in a transient nature is, I think it's kind of precarious to other issues involving hotels. The cities typically put a lot of money into hotel development in their early stages. They try to foster them. There's a lot of revenue that's generated from hotel tax revenue and property taxes from hotels. And as hotels age and mature, they also can they can slip off the edge too. And I know that that's one of the issues that you're trying to face in regards to the what do you do with an old hotel? Well, that's, as long as they're standing, they're going to be housing people, and trying to correct the issue of density and all those issues that are involved with a hotel by a law that that just looks at criminal activity. I think you're kind of missing the point. It may be easy to put them out of business that way, but you're not going to solve the problem. And so I think you're for a hotel point of view, you're better off spending time in that. I would rather see hotels taken out of the ordinance specifically because of the fact that there are such a unique nature to them, and just by using a law that criminalizes the management and the ownership is, I think, a little short-sighted. And I think you really need to take a look at that. You're going to be putting a lot of money into hotels, I'm sure over the next few years to get them built, but you better have a long-term program to get them off the tax rolls rather than just by criminalizing the ownership. And that, to me, is what this looks like from a hotel's perspective. We have 25,000 people that can reside in a hotel in a given year in my property. You get larger properties, much higher, and then you also got the issue of their guests. So you could effectively, plus the meeting rooms and all that sort of thing that go on, plus there's multiple uses that occur at hotels with bars and that sort of thing. Three instances of activity, criminal activity, is not a lot. Now there are, and I know that you'd list out the different, actual triggers or crimes that can occur, but let me assure you that there isn't a hotel that half of these things don't occur in a given year, in any hotel. One of the things is, it's the unintended consequence issue in regards to hotels. That when seizures of property, private property, came about with trying to correct the drug problem, one of the big problems is that those laws force people into hotels. You can go and rent a hotel room privately, drag in your equipment, make your meth, cut your crack, weigh out your marijuana in a hotel room, and you don't have to worry about having property seized. Prostitution. People can go out on the street and hire a prostitute. They can bring them back into the hotel. If an arrest occurs at the hotel, the ownership of the property is not responsible for that. The people that run the hotel are not responsible for that. It's the people that are actually the transient that's in the hotel that's doing that. And so you really put, in a hotel situation, you're putting people, the ownership and the management in a real precarious position, because, and then you got also issues of privacy and that sort of thing that are really added on to the top of that. So from the point of view of a hotel, I really do request you kind of take a real strong look at that. And it's not going to solve your problem by criminalizing the activity. The things that are occurring are already a crime. What you're doing is criminalizing the management and the ownership because of the fact that they can't occur because of a transient nature of the people that are staying there. So.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Duchesne? Dennis.
One of the things I've been wondering about is a year is a long time to set out to accrue 3 instances. In an apartment complex, there could be 3 instances in 2 weeks potentially.
Oh, sure.
So do you think that one of the things is that the time period is way too long? Would you suggest, if there's going to be a time period at all, that it should be briefer? And what would you suggest?
From my point of view of a hotel, when it's not the crime that occurs, but it's a police call that occurs, I rely upon the police to be my assistant in regard to dealing with transient populations. I know nothing about them. I don't know what they're capable of, and so whenever there's an issue, I have to be able to rely upon calling the police. Now, every time I call the police, it's going to put a little click next to my property's name that says, well, we've been called out to that property. Well, maybe it wasn't for the list of things in this ordinance, but things can be added to this ordinance. We've talked about things adding to the tenant ordinance here already tonight. So, I mean, once the ordinance is established, things can change with it pretty quick. To me, it's basing them on the police call versus an actual crime that's committed I think is the issue in regards to that. You can put any number of, how effective is the law going to be if it's 1 call per day versus 1 call in 3 months? I really don't know that. I think it's the nature of the nature of the ordinance and how it's set up that maybe it's my big problem in regard to how that's going to be done. So.
Okay, Mayor.
I would just like to point out that the intent is not just based on police calls. It's whether the management is being ignoring the problem or being negligent. And I agree with you. You wouldn't want people to be punished simply for calling the police, because we want them to call the police. And I think that's where the misunderstanding is, that somehow this is just going to be intensely done by the Urbana.
But why does it say in here the police call is what triggers the?
Well, it's also in there that it's the judgment of the staff whether this is a property that needs some talking to of the management, or if the management's doing everything that they can. And it has in there that if the management's doing everything that they can, they wouldn't get fined. So I think we've made a real effort to deal with what your concern is, but maybe we could do it better, and if we'll try to clarify it, but certainly, I think it's really a misconception that this is something that's just going to be widely being applied based on police calls. It's going to be based on who's really negligent and is ignoring problems on their property.
Do you have any other comments, John?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Shirley Stillinger, and then on deck is Esther Pat. Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
Tell us your name and address.
My name
and
is Shirley Stillinger, and I live at 1003 South Busey. I was taken aback when I read the summary of this ordinance, and many questions came to mind which may ultimately be answered. I'm not sure to my satisfaction. What are the crimes that this ordinance is expected to eliminate, to prevent? And how will you know if, you expect the crime rate to go down because of this ordinance? Have the other communities, which you say have it, has their crime rate gone down? And a really important question to me is, does our police department feel that this would be a useful tool for them to be able to do something they cannot do now? To me, it seems such heavy machinery. My guess is that you're really thinking there may be 2 or 3 landlords that are a problem. And is all of this heavy machinery, it looks to me like, necessary to get? Is there no other way? On a personal level, as a member of the Homestead Board of Directors, I am a landlord. Homestead, I hope you all know, is a not-for-profit organization with the mission to create and support decent, affordable housing to the lowest income people. We have an apartment building of Efficiency Apartments on Griggs, and we are a partner in the Crystal View development. A lot of our money, and especially to build, came from federal and state funds, and we cannot, except under terrible red tape, evict anybody. We have trouble evicting someone who doesn't pay rent for month after month. So to say to us that we would need to evict somebody, it can't be done. That's not because of the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance. That's because of, mainly of HUD, I think. You ask what specific parts of this I would want to amend or to change. I would like to throw away the whole thing, personally. And I realize that there are people who worked a long time on this, and I'm sorry I only heard about it at the end, because my concern is not just as a Homestead Board member, but it's also just as a longtime citizen of Urbana, and to me, it just seems like the wrong direction to go. So I wish I knew what crimes this is going to eliminate that cannot be dealt with in any other way. Do you need to create this elaborate procedure, mainly to get, is my time up, mainly to get at a couple of people or a couple of landlords is my guess. And I realize you're probably not going to come after Homestead, but if there is a law, everybody needs to abide by it, whether you're going to come after us or not. And it creates a really chilling atmosphere.
Thanks, Shirley. I saw the mayor's.
Yeah, I would like to answer your question about, there's an awful lot of staff time that goes into dealing with these landlords that aren't paying attention to their property, and that's where it's aimed. And this has proven in other cities as a quick way to get people's attention. And we got people were concerned that we were going to close down properties and people were going to be homeless and all this kind of thing. We tried to deal with all those perceptions, although we didn't think that was going to be a real problem. But the cities that have it say that it does work and that people fix the problems and they don't have to pay the fines. And it's to prevent the property from deteriorating and affecting the surrounding properties. That's the point. And I think it would, help the crime rate, but Urbana doesn't have any higher crime rate than Champaign. This is just a way of getting at very narrow problems.
See, but I don't see how this keeps property from deteriorating.
Okay.
It seems to be aimed at people,
Okay.
not at the property.
Yeah, okay, it's the activity on the property, that if it's a question of having better lighting or excluding people, outsiders who are coming in and creating havoc for the residents, that's the kind of thing that is dealt with. It would depend on what the situation is, but we're not talking about a huge effort. There's no huge machine. This is a tool that's used very narrowly.
As I say, it worries me to have a law that is intended for a few, maybe now. Laws on the books, maybe 10 years from now, somebody else may say, we can use it, we can go after more people. I mean, it seems to be too big a blanket for a couple of cases.
David, do you have a question?
Just briefly, you sort of characterize it as being, you don't object to the goals of the ordinance in terms of what it's trying to do, but you think that the...
I didn't say that.
Oh, well, I'm wondering, are you differentiating between the goals of the ordinance versus the mechanisms in the ordinance that...
I'm not sure what the goal is.
Okay.
If the goal is to decrease crime in general, to lower the crime rate in Urbana, is the goal to get after 2 or 3 landlords? And if that's the goal, I would just think there could be another way to do it without this elaborate structure.
Okay, thank you.
And as a board member of Homestead, I'm concerned.
Yeah. Heather?
When you read the ordinance, and when I read the ordinance, it seems to me like we're punishing the wrong people. And I don't know if that's something that you gathered from looking
Well, I
at
felt
this.
it would be putting a burden on us as landlords to do something that, and I can't speak for others, but as a not-for-profit organization, we don't have the staff, we don't, and we can't evict people for any of these things. So,
Thank you for your thoughtful.
Yeah. Thank you for
Okay,
listening.
thanks, Shirley. Next, we have Esther Pat, and then on deck, Laura Weiss. Esther, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for this time to address you. I'm one of 2 members of the Neighborhood Safety Task Force who voted against this ordinance because I felt, and as it happened, we were the 2 people representing tenant interests on there, because I felt that it would do more harm than good. I think there are other things that the city usually can do to fight crime, if you want to fight more crime. But the overwhelming majority of crimes at apartment complexes are not committed by, or are not the fault of landlords or tenants, or in most cases, tenants' guests. And I think something that Heather just said about, punishing the wrong people, I think that's true. I also want to comment, I could see many bad things coming from this, and one of the bad things is, again, this whole conversation about convicted felons. Heather, you live in Behringer Commons. Most definitely, a rapist could move in or a child molester next door to you, because there's nothing that stops rapists and child molesters from buying homes anywhere they can afford them. And that is fundamentally what the Human Rights Ordinance protection is about, is that people who commit the most heinous crimes, if their families can afford a house, they can live wherever they want. They can live next to Charlie, next door to David's apartment building, next door to Robert, next door to the mayor, next door to Brandon, next door to me, and on down the line. And that's just a fact. But in the meantime, what we see in places, like Branch or Champaign, is someone who's got a felony conviction for shoplifting 10 years ago, is because they did it more than once before they joined AA and stopped going into places like County Market to try to steal a bottle of vodka, they get turned down because they're convicted felons and they were charged and convicted of burglary, and they've done their time, and for their trying to shoplift something worth less than $20, already got sentenced to 4 years in prison, and for the rest of their lives, they're going to be turned down. I don't know if you actually, I don't think there's a single person who believes that if you allow landlords to deny housing to anyone with a felony conviction, that these convicted felons will disintegrate and then dissipate into the atmosphere. But they're not. They're going to live somewhere. And if you think it's better for people with conviction records to be living under the radar and someplace where you don't know where they're at unofficially, go ahead and try it, but I think it will be a mistake. And if you look at all the other communities around, well, we just look at Champaign. Champaign put an exception into their human rights ordinance that allows that discrimination against convicted felons only in rental property, of course, not in purchase of property, not in employment, not in access to public accommodations. Has that lowered the crime rate in Champaign? Of course, the answer is no. If you're really concerned about convicted felons in apartments, would you make it against the law for a landlord to hire a convicted felon to a job that involved where the convicted felon had keys to tenants' apartments? That's something that's going on right now. If the resident manager, a landlord can hire a child molester and give him keys to the apartments. Oh, well, there's no protection. And I never, ever hear anyone, not landlords, not anyone who get on you about, or has gotten on Urbana about this, ever bring up that issue. And in fact, I've had people come here, heard people come here and say you should ban convicted felons from apartments. And when I say, well, when I was on the council, I said, well, would you support prohibiting landlords from hiring convicted felons to jobs where they have keys to tenants' apartments? And the answer was no, because we don't want to tell landlords what to do. It's the same thing. The fact that a person is a convicted felon doesn't mean that they're going to commit a crime. Half of people with felony convictions never commit another crime again. And the main point is, if you want to do something about crime, you've got to do more about the criminals, the people. And that's the whole point of the apartment complexes. Forget about blaming the landlord, blaming tenants, putting up fences, doing all these things. How about how can you better address law enforcement? And one suggestion which came up several times at the Neighborhood Safety Task Force, but I don't think was taken seriously, was there are people who witness criminal activity and are afraid to call the police because they're convinced, particularly with regard to drug dealing and gun violence related to it, they're convinced the drug dealers are going to find out they made the report. Having a way for people to report it right when it's happening, not to email Crime Stoppers and 3 days later, but to be able to call and say, a drug deal is coming down right now in the parking lot at such and such an address. How can they do that? With total confidentiality so no one finds out it was them. And how do you all communicate that to the public so people have the confidence doing it? I think that's the single most positive step you can make toward improving what is already an excellent record here in Urbana for reducing crime, and I wish that you would go in that direction and not wander in this other one. Thank you.
Any questions for Esther?
Yeah.
First, Heather.
Esther, I would tell you that I wasn't saying that for someone to buy a home. That's not what I was saying. I was saying about renting, that because of the ordinance, the human rights.
Oh, right, I
ordinance,
understand that.
We can't do background checks, including employees. And that's where I'm saying not just renters or anything, not tenants, but landlords and everybody, including landlords who hire people, employees, even in the city, should,
And what about homeowners? I mean, that's my point, Heather. I understand exactly what you're saying. And every time this comes up, I just wonder, all these homeowners who say, oh, but a rapist can move in next door to me. Actually, among all of the crimes, rapists and child molesters are more likely to be homeowners than people who commit most of the other crimes. And there is absolutely no protection against someone who commits such a crime moving in next door to you, no matter who you are. If you own your own home, because they can buy their own house, and nobody's stopping them. No one's trying to control where they live. So why is it okay that a rapist or a child molester, and child molesters are rapists, but whether they rape adults or children, that they can live wherever they want, because this is America, and you have freedom as long as they can afford to own their own home. Then they can live wherever they want, even Behringer Commons if they can afford it. But if you're a tenant, you should be homeless because you committed a crime. You can't get past that. If you want to allow landlords to discriminate against people in renting because of conviction record, then what you're saying is the crime isn't what matters, it's the income of the person. And if they can afford home ownership, they can live wherever they want, and if they rent, they should, I guess, dissolve and dissipate into the atmosphere. That's just a reality you have to address, that that's part of a big part of the issue.
That's the bank issue, not that.
Okay. More questions? David?
Same basic question I asked Shirley.
Yes.
The goals of the ordinance have been spelled out, and your problem with the ordinance isn't the goals of the ordinance, it's the machinery that it puts into place to try to achieve them. Is that fair to say?
Well, if the goal is, I'll say, but Shirley's that the goal is reducing crime, I'm all for reducing crime, but I will point out that without this ordinance, the crime rate in Urbana dropped 27% in 4 years. But you could always do more because we still have crime. And as I just said, I mean, to repeat myself, I think the single best thing you could do for fighting crime would be to take advantage of the opportunity to have more citizens involved in reporting crimes to the police. And I think there is a big opportunity there that's not being tapped into because people are afraid. I get calls to the tenant union from people who tell me that there's criminal stuff going on, and a lot of them want the landlord to do something about it. And the first thing I say is, "Have you called the police?" And then I get to think about they're afraid.
Any
So
other
address that, and I think you'll see it'll make a big difference.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Esther. Next, we have Laura Weiss. And while you're coming up, I do want to very briefly read a comment from one person who left us a note but had to leave early. This was Ruth Wyman of 706 South Kohler, Unit Number 6. She said, "I urge council to spend the city's resources to increase police protection with more patrols, not spend resources for the proposed ordinance, which is vague and is fraught with problems. Please reject proposal number 8. Laura, good evening.
Good
Welcome.
evening. First, we wish to recognize the receptiveness of all the council members who met with the chamber members and our staff in advance of this evening. Plus, we wish to acknowledge the hard work that the Neighborhood Safety Task Force, who has clearly given this topic a lot of thoughtful consideration. The Champaign County Chamber of Commerce supports safe neighborhoods and holding people who commit criminal acts accountable. Having said this, though, the Chamber, an association of over 1,300 businesses, cannot support this proposed ordinance because although the intent is right, the ordinance is wrong. At a meeting held last Friday, a city staffer was quoted as saying, "Other urban areas have this ordinance, why can't we?" Well, our question is, why is what other cities have relevant? This is about developing tools to make our communities safer. Just because other communities have adopted this sort of tool does not necessarily make it right for Urbana, particularly because of the conflicting nature of the city's human rights ordinance. First and foremost, under the human rights ordinance, the city of Urbana prohibits landlords from preventing crime on their properties by not allowing landlords to use criminal conviction history as a means to select their tenants. While we agree that people who have made a mistake should be given a second chance, this is clearly different from being forced to rent to repeat offenders of serious crimes, people who are likely to repeat again. Forcing landlords to rent to repeat offenders and then holding landlords accountable for their tenants' actions is hypocrisy at its best. This proposed ordinance is riddled with so many inconsistencies. Its language conflicts with other existing city ordinances. It provides unprecedented authority to city government, including the ability to shut down a business without due process. And while we say the intent is not to be this broad-based ordinance, it's the issue of intent is really not relevant because when the law provides for so much subjectivity, the intent gets lost. The threshold of the 3 police reports, not conviction in a year's time, is questionable when defining chronic. It is so broadly written that it could never be fairly enforced, and you can't pass ordinances where you can pick and choose who you're going to enforce it upon. It allows for far too much subjectivity when it comes to applying the law. And lastly, it is redundant because the city does not need an ordinance for the police to arrest people who commit crimes that are already defined under the law. In regards to the proposed amendment to the Urbana landlord-tenant relationship ordinance regarding the no trespass and ban notices to be discussed by the council tonight as it relates to this ordinance, the amendment will only further prohibit landlords' abilities to take proactive measures on their properties to prevent crime. By limiting only arrest and convictions to qualify a tenant's guest to be banned from the property is too reactive rather than proactive. Landlords need the tools to ban the guests of tenants who cause serious trouble on their property before it results in an arrest. Furthermore, not all levels of actions for which banning may be warranted required an arrest and conviction. It is in the best interest of the landlord, the tenant's guest, and the other tenants in the building that an arrest and conviction not be the minimum qualification for initiating a ban and/or no trespass notice. We thank the City Council for not passing this proposed ordinance, and we are asking the Council to commit to working with the expertise within our membership to find a solution that will narrowly target to correct the problem properties for which this proposed ordinance was originally intended. No one wants crime-ridden communities. We want Urbana to be a community in which our Urbana members and all businesses thrive. But we must work together to find the right solution. The proposed chronic criminal nuisance property ordinance is just not the right solution. The unintended consequences of passing this ordinance is just simply too great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Laura? Mayor?
Yeah. I understand that Chamber didn't want Champaign to pass their ordinance 12 years ago. And so I wondered what the rationale was then and if your fears have actually been realized.
I haven't been here 12 years. I can't speak to what occurred then. I think there is somebody in the audience that was a participant with the Chamber when that occurred, but I have no knowledge of what transpired 12 years ago.
But are the Chamber members satisfied with how the ordinance works in Champaign?
It's my understanding that the ordinance is not applied that often in Champaign. But the huge difference between the City of Champaign ordinance and the Urbana proposed ordinance is the human rights ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Heather?
And also that this applies, the proposed ordinance here in Urbana applies to
Everybody. All property.
Every property in the city, and in Champaign is different.
Residential.
It's just okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Diane?
Yeah, I read Champagne's ordinance too. It also is much more targeted. It has specific guidelines and conditions for abatement agreements. It sets an upper limit of 24 months for which an abatement agreement is in place. It doesn't give the city the power to shut down buildings or businesses. So it's much more targeted, less sweeping in general. And I think that's all very good characteristics to shoot for in an Urbana ordinance as well.
Any other questions for Laura? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Daryl Cruz, and then Tom Hodson. You're on deck after Daryl. Daryl, good evening.
Good evening. My name's Daryl Cruz. I live at 2007 South George Huck Drive, and I've spoken to the City Council about this issue publicly a time or two before, and I sent each of you an email several weeks ago identifying some of the concerns that I and others I have talked to have with this particular proposed ordinance. And it's interesting to note how opposition to the ordinance seems to be growing within the community as broader segments of the community become aware and familiar with the ordinance itself. And I guess I would like to suggest to you what I see is an inherent process problem with how the city has chosen to do this. I'm not questioning the intent, why it's being done, but I think there's something fundamentally wrong and will continue to be wrong with the way you are going about doing this. First of all, I'm opposed to the ordinance. I think I'm opposed to any ordinance with any revisions that it has, simply because I think there's not a justification for it. There's a lack of due process and fairness that's built in, not built into it, and there's a lot of ambiguity and discretion that is being given to one or two people to make subjective decisions as to when it will apply and not apply that really can be troublesome to the population as a whole. And I don't know how you eliminate that subjectivity from the legal department and the police chief to make those fairly without any due process procedures for people that are being found fault with. The other thing I would like to say is that, I'll come back to it again, and it's been said, the ordinance does not address the substance or nature of the root causes of the problem. It's simply a cosmetic approach to trying to move the problem somewhere else that it currently exists. It doesn't get fundamentally to addressing and solving it. And if you go back and look at how the process was started, I will simply say I've attended several, not all of the neighborhood safety task force meetings. The last one I attended, I believe there were 16 people attended. There were 6 city staff members, 6 members from neighborhood community organizations, residential single-family homeowners, and a couple, I believe 2, the 2 people that voted against, that might have represented tenant unions or landlords. The problem I think that you are encountering is the fact that the Neighborhood Safety Task Force has been put together in a disproportionate representation of representing primarily city staff or the mayor's position, because everybody on city staff basically argues and justifies any counter-argument being given as to why it's okay. Okay, so it's very hard for an ordinary citizen to speak to the legal department and say, oh, well, this works here, this works there, not having the background. The other point is that the homeowners have a valid issue, except in writing the language, I think you found landlords weren't included, hotel owners weren't included, the business community wasn't included. You have left out 75% of the community. And you're asking this to go back to that very narrow perspective, to try to amend and revise it to make it acceptable. How many times have you done that? Is this going to be the 3rd time it's going back to them for revisions after input? I question whether this task force is capable, as it's made up, to come back with the revisions that will reflect the community's perspective on this issue. I don't think they can. I think you ought to look at that just because of the history of how this has evolved and how controversial it's become, and the lack of input from different segments of the community. It's inherently built in to leave those voices out, and they have been left out. There are homeowners that, such as myself, that do not agree with many aspects of this, but I don't see any homeowners on there that represent that perspective either. It's only those that tend to. So I would bring that issue or that problem, what I see, to you as something to look at. Very quickly in closing, I would simply say that if at some point down the road revisions come back to you and you decide some form or fashion you want to pass an ordinance, if you do that, which I hope you don't have to, please include due process language for landlords and tenants so their rights can also be protected. And also you've included last step language. In other words, in 18 months you can come back and revise. And I would suggest to you all of the issues that are of controversy, leave them out. In 18 months, come back and see if you want to add them, if it can work without it, rather than put them in and in 18 months come and see if you need to remove them. Do it just the opposite way.
Thanks, Darrell. Questions, Diane?
I would just like to clarify, I think the Neighborhood Safety Task Force is getting too much blame or credit, depending on which side of the fence you're on. I served on the Neighborhood Safety Task Force for several years, including through this spring when we saw this ordinance. We did not write this ordinance. This came to the task force for review, just like it came before the council 4 times for review in November, December, January, and February. These passed. So we did not, the task force members did not come up with this language. We changed some things. I think we made it 3 offenses instead of 2. We extended the review period to 18 months instead of leaving it at 12 months. But this language did not originate with the task force. And I don't want that impression to remain. And I agree with you. I originally supported the concept of this ordinance, as you know, because you were sitting in the meetings, but after thinking about it for a long time and hearing very thoughtful input from the Chamber of Commerce, the Apartment Association, the Hotel Motel folks, Kip Pope, the Atkins Group, yourself, and other residents, I basically concluded that as written, the benefits didn't outweigh the costs. I mean, it was doing more harm than good. So I totally agree that we need to, if we're going to get at this problem, we need to go upstream, include people who have different perspectives and a wider viewpoint on this, and I think we can come up with something really good that will get to reach our goals. I just talked to Kip Pope tonight, and he said, why don't we strive for creating a model ordinance? And I think that should be our goal, something that is better than any other cities, if that's our goal. But I just want you to know it's not the Neighborhood Safety Task Force who created this thing. We reviewed it just like everybody else in this room reviewed it, and several times.
Mayor, yeah.
I would like to say that we did have landlords on the Neighborhood Safety Task Force.
I didn't say there wasn't.
Yeah, but I mean, you said we left out 75% of the population. The Neighborhood Safety Task Force is made up of representatives of every city neighborhood association, plus representatives of tenants and of landlords.
Correct.
And the staff is there just to answer questions. They liked the concept, and so we brought them some ordinances, and then the ordinances were changed by suggestions from the city council and by suggestions from people on the Neighborhood Safety Task Force. So they didn't write the language, but they made the suggestions, and then they approved the language. So, I mean,
This to me, the public, because I was there, I understand that.
okay, but you just said that we left out the landlords, and we
No.
didn't.
I don't think I did. I said they're
Well, you
not
said they were just
proportionally
homeowners and tenants. That meeting, we didn't have any representatives from landlords, but, you know, they were involved in the process. I just wanted to make that
Let me
clear.
clarify. I think homeowners were proportionally represented in greater numbers as to this proportion to the housing segments in our community, because 55-60% of the community is tenant-based renters, and I'll bet you there weren't 60% tenants or landlords as compared to single homeowners on the committee, as an example.
Okay. Other questions? Heather?
Yes, I wonder if any business owners were involved in writing any of this language, because I'm making this question because if not, and that yet all their properties are included in this ordinance, it seems like quite a contradiction that we're including all these businesses in such a broad scheme, and yet these business owners aren't even represented when it comes to writing this language, and that I have a big problem with.
Is that a particular question for Darrell?
My
or maybe-
question is for whoever can answer it. Was there even one single business owner involved in the writing of this ordinance?
I think the mayor could speak to the makeup.
Again, the people on the task force didn't write it. They made the suggestions. They looked at the writing. They made suggestions for changes, but they didn't literally write it. It was written by the legal staff based on a number of other city ordinances. And we have asked for input from people. Our staff went to the Apartment Owners Association and asked for their input. So we welcome suggestions of people. If they have specific sections that they would like to change the wording, we will look at what they have to say. So, I mean, I said in my opening remarks that we welcome public participation. This has been before the Urbana City Council a number of times, and these are public meetings. So we do ask for input.
My question still wasn't answered. Was there one business owner that had anything to do, one business owner that had anything to do with looking over this ordinance and giving any amendments or questions besides landlords?
And I'll
business
recognize the mayor to answer that, but then I do want to stick to the public input. Really, we'll get time to debate, but this is the time to hear from the public mostly. Mayor, do you want to briefly respond to that.
The
and then
people
we'll-
on the task force were landlords, and the council approved the makeup of the Neighborhood Safety Task Force, and if you want to add more people, we can certainly do that.
So we can come back to that discussion. Are there any other questions for Darrell Cruz while he's still here? None? Okay, thank you very much, Darrell. Next, we have Tom Hodson, and on deck, Neil Malone. Tom, good evening.
Good evening. My name's Tom Hodson. I live at 2011 O'Donnell Drive in Champaign. I'm also the president of the board of directors of Homestead Corporation, a community housing development organization. We operate Homestead Apartments on Grigg Street. And I think we are in the position of being both a good citizen and a citizen or an organization that has been at one stage, at least at the early stages of our development, controversial. And it's for that reason I can understand and foresee a potential abuse of this ordinance. Perhaps not this council, but certainly there was a time when there were people looking at us, and if there had been 3 police calls, they would have jumped at that opportunity to put us out of business. And if they were on the city council, they would have done so. So I think this particular scheme is very, very heavy on arbitrary power and very weak on objective standards. And although the mayor is convinced that that would never be abused, I, in my own experience, could certainly foresee a situation where it could have been abused and put us in a way that would have put us out of business. I would like to have you, as you consider this, are you punishing people for things over which they have control, or are you punishing people over which they have no control and are just being selected as by somebody arbitrarily as bad people? And I'm afraid that, you know, as we consider what is the rule of law versus the rule of man or woman, this falls very heavily on the side of the rule of people as opposed to the rule of law. And I have some specific suggestions that would deal with this problem. First of all, this idea of the 3 police call trigger is very problematic. It potentially punishes victims the same as it does evildoers. It could bring together 3 widely disparate events and use that as a trigger. And in the hands of somebody with an agenda, it could be done so wrongfully. And I think and I can foresee a court case, and I'm a lawyer, how this would come to court. There would be a simple complaint that would say there were 3 police calls, admit or deny. Well, there were 3 police calls, boom, you're dead. And that's very troubling. It doesn't really provide for meaningful due process. It's a fig leaf of a pretextual objective basis, but not a meaningful objective basis. And the way you could get around that is to say something like, in your notice, there were 3 police calls and the respondent promoted or allowed a nuisance as shown by the following conduct. Well, if you do that, you don't even need the 3 police calls. It's an unnecessary element. But what you need is really a factual basis as opposed to a pretextual basis for this whole regulatory scheme. I think that it's also interesting to me you're using 3 police calls. You know, in the Illinois rules of evidence, there are some exceptions for hearsay, but police reports are specifically excluded from those exceptions. There are very few cases where police reports are admissible in evidence. They're specifically excluded, and yet you're using them as your trigger. That's mind-boggling from a lawyer's point of view. If the 3 police calls are to remain in any way a part of this function, they need to be somehow more refined. They need to be related in some subject matter way. In other words, 3 police calls for the same kind of misconduct. And you have to recognize it. We operate a 24-unit facility. There might be a police call for domestic violence in this unit. There might be somebody drinking too much in a fight over how loud a television is. Somebody threatens to knock their block off. The police are called, everybody cools off, there's no big problem, but there's been a threat. That's an assault. That's police call number 2. Then we're under the dagger. Then maybe some resident unwisely invites in a guest who somehow engages in some kind of predatory conduct toward that tenant. Boom, there you're at 3. But we don't have a chance under the scenario that I'm talking about, just 3 police calls and you're dead, of presenting the fact that those are disparate events. I think as drafted, Section 1D talks about the high and lofty principles and how the city intends to have good faith. And they intend to allow the property owner to have a realistic opportunity to abate the situation. That shouldn't be precatory language that doesn't have any role in the process. That needs to be made a defense, that if the city doesn't do that in a good faith way, that can be raised in court. And as it's written, it's not a defense. It's merely just a lofty statement of principle that has no meaning to somebody who's under the gun of 3 police calls. So those are specific suggestions that I think would be helpful. I do think that this is a worthwhile activity, but I think you also have to consider very seriously that a basic principle of liberal democracy is the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of men and women. And this is a thinly guised attempt to give very broad arbitrary power with very little objective restraint.
Okay, Mayor has a question.
Yeah, I wondered, have you looked at the Champaign ordinance? Because it also has police calls.
I would object to that on the same way, but I'm not aware of any instance where it's been applied. If you intend to apply it, if it's never applied, it's not a problem.
It's applied in the sense that people are asked to work out an abatement agreement, and that's what the intention is if there are calls and the police department and the legal department think that there's an ongoing problem here that the owner is neglecting, then they bring in the owner to talk about ways to abate it. And it also says in the ordinance that if it's beyond the control of the owner will not be held accountable. I mean, we've gone over and over this kind of thing, that we do not want to hold people accountable for things that they have no control over.
I understand your statement of that. I don't see it in the mechanics of the ordinance. I see a complaint that says there have been 3 police calls, and it's up to the city before that to decide whether the owner has been cooperating or not. Again, an arbitrary standard as opposed to an objective standard. And let me talk a little bit about the abatements that you suggest. They're problematic. They talk in terms of eviction. And eviction, particularly for criminal conduct, is not that easy. I represent landlords, and I struggle with that in part because it's often hard to get witnesses who will cooperate. It's a brave tenant who will come and testify against another, and it's a very rare situation where the landlord will have actual knowledge and is able to testify. And of course, there are police reports, but they're not admissible. So, and another thing it talks about is barment. Well, in Urbana, and I think in Champaign in general, barments are not enforced. That's one of the things that I would like to see changed. I'm aware of a situation where a landlord came across an invitee disassembling an elevator and called the police and said, I want to have this person barred, and the Urbana police said, we don't do that in Urbana. I can think of other situations. If an individual were defacing property with gang graffiti, and the landlord actually saw it, and the landlord sought to bar that person, they couldn't do it. And yet you have this prohibition on gang activity. I'd like to talk about just a couple of other things that really, does the landlord have any control? You list arson. Now, I've been representing landlords, and I have also represented tenants for legal aid for 20 years. I've been a lawyer for 35 years. Before that 20 years, there was a time when I represented insurance companies in arson defense cases. I have never yet to see a landlord going out there to beat the bushes. Yes, yes, I want that arsonist in my unit. But I will say, it is unique that Urbana is perhaps the only place I've been where the landlord will be prohibited from denying the arsonist rental. I mean, that's really strange, but that's where we are. I see that the use or possession of cannabis is one of the triggering events. And it wasn't so long ago I had a son in college at Madison, and I would have been extremely happy if I could have encouraged my son to rent from a landlord who would certify that he maintained a cannabis-free establishment, rental unit. But I don't think there's any way he could have done that. And he certainly couldn't have done it in Urbana, because I think that would take regular inspections that would violate your landlord-tenant ordinance. I mean, the landlords just do not have the power to control the things that you seek to control with this ordinance. And the abatement mechanisms you suggest are not really available either. To get an eviction is not something, you have to have a very carefully drafted drug and crime prevention section. I've seen few leases that have that. I have some where we try to do it in other communities in the county, and then it's still very difficult because it's so hard to prove.
Other questions for Tom from council members? Dennis.
Your comments bring to mind a question that's been in my mind a little bit, and that is that some people have espoused that the better place for some of these regulations is in the landlord rental agreement and the ordinance that governs registration of properties by the landlords. What do you think about that? Do you think that, I mean, well, I guess we'd be talking about the same apples, they just be in a different bucket, but do you think that, having brought up the nature of leases that you have seen or would perhaps like to see, clauses that would be in a lease, there's a question about what kind of clauses ought to be in a lease and what kind of clauses should be avoided in or banned from entering into lease agreements. So what is your comment on that as far as controlling activities?
I think it's very hard to put a landlord in the position of in loco parentis, but I think there are clauses that can be helpful. I think those could be encouraged and are made available. I am some trouble with mandating a particular lease form, but I think perhaps as part of an abatement provision, something like that could be encouraged. And I think, but I think it's also very difficult when you are restricted in your tenant selection. I think that there is language that is perhaps consistent with the current ordinance, and we have a particularly vulnerable population at Homestead, so we've thought quite a bit about this. But I think if you say you're not going to bar somebody based on a criminal conviction, but you can bar them based on a history of violent, recent or repeated history of violent or predatory conduct, and that is consistent with your business purpose. There is a business purpose exception, because Busey Bank clearly can look at criminal conviction records. Champaign County Nursing Home is mandated by state law to look at criminal conviction records. The Head Start facility is mandated by state law, looking at criminal conviction records. By the way, City of Aurora, that has an ordinance like this, mandates landlords to do criminal background checks. It's not a matter that you're not precluding somebody simply based on a particular level of conviction. You're doing it based on conduct, but a conviction is evidence of conduct. And so I differ that you can't look at the criminal history. You may not be able to preclude based on that, but if the criminal history indicates certain kind of conduct, maybe you ought to be able to preclude based on it.
Other questions for Tom? Mayor?
I just want to thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Neil Malone, and then on deck, Eric Bussell. I hope I pronounced your name right. Neil, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, in the interest of the temperature in here, and that many of my comments have been made already. I'll be as brief as possible. I've been sort of striking sections of my prepared remarks, so if it's a little disjointed, I apologize. Again, my name is Neil Malone. I am Governmental Affairs Director. I work for the Illinois Association of Realtors. And in my professional responsibilities, I do both State House issues for our association as well as local governmental affairs issues for 7 of our local associations, pretty much spanning from Jacksonville to Danville and from Lincoln to Decatur, essentially. So pretty much a wide band across the middle of the state. And in that responsibility, I've been asked to appear by the Champaign County Association, whose address is 305 Burwash, Savoy. That being said, a couple of comments. First, I would like to sincerely thank all of the members of the council who made themselves available to our kind of joint effort with the Apartment Association, the Realtors, as well as the Champaign County Chamber on this particular piece of legislation. I think a lot of the comments have been made, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but some of my supporting points are reflective of some of these larger points. The point has been made earlier that by taking this approach, and again, the 600 realtors who I represent in this area who are involved in the vast majority of all property transactions over here, both commercial and residential, as well as a fair number of property management operations over here as well. We all share the goal of the council in having safe neighborhoods that are a place that people want to live and work and invest in the community. There's no quarrel with our organization, or I think I can speak for the Apartment Association and Chamber as well, that we all share that vision. Unfortunately, I don't think that this ordinance is a very effective way of getting to that point. And in my job, there's a network of guys like me and females like me, well, rephrase that, females and males who do a job similar to mine. That sounds better anyway. That we actually work in all localities throughout the state of Illinois. Every community in Illinois is in one of our jurisdictions. And I have dealt with folks who are laboring in municipalities where this ordinance exists. And for every success story that a municipal council or mayor or village president may offer, I bet I can offer 2 horror stories of how it was applied. Because at its very center, this ordinance criminalizes property and places, it doesn't criminalize people. And what I mean by that is that by making specific parcels of property criminal by virtue of what goes on those properties, you actually never really address the root cause, which is the criminal behavior of individuals who happen to be inhabiting that space at that time. In one sense, you sort of push that around the game board, that if one parcel becomes criminalized, and especially in Urbana, which is the only, to my knowledge, jurisdiction in Illinois that provides for the word I'm looking for would be ability by the landlord to make decisions based on criminal history. You have, again, I hate to demonstrate the absurdity by being absurd, but you could theoretically have a tenant who's an arsonist burn down the apartment that they lived in and then move to a different apartment in Urbana, and that landlord would not be able to take that into account. It seems to me it's an unusual burden to put on landlords and property owners when you tie their hands through another part of the ordinance. Additionally, I don't think that it is fair or even enlightened that this ordinance is triggered by police calls. Now, that criminal property doesn't have to be the home of the perpetrator. It can also be the home of the victim. So if you had a situation where there were 3 assaults, with some of the horrible things that can happen in domestic violence relationships, in just generalized assaults. If someone were to assault you or burglarize your house, or violate any of the 20 pieces that are delineated in the ordinance, that counts as a strike against your property. And again, I don't know that it's been hammered home enough that this is every piece of property in Urbana, residential, industrial, commercial. Theoretically, parks and schools would fall under this particular ordinance. In addition, I think I've pounded away on the fact that there are conflicts with existing housing-related parts of your code, and it doesn't really fit well as tightly as it might, or it does in other areas, unfortunately. And so you've got definitions that are used in some parts of the housing-related code, and then it's not the same in another part. I think that creates a lot of uncertainty and a lot of potential for problems for property owners and for landlords. For example, this, at least in the earliest versions I saw of the legislation, I might not have the most up-to-date, but initially it would say a piece of property. Now, that we don't know if that is a bedroom in a rooming house, or is it the rooming house? Is it like the one property on North Lincoln where you've got literally hundreds of residential units? That hard cap of 3 police calls really kind of is really unfair to larger multifamily, especially situations.
1 minute. What about 1 minute left?
Okay, sure. Well, I guess I will again thank all the council members for their willingness to meet with us, and I cannot overstate my happiness that we're at least going to pull this off. And I would like to offer my help or any of our kind of coalition to work on this. I think that, again, we all want to get to the same place. And you can weed a garden down on your hands and knees and your fingers, or you can napalm the entire thing. And I think that is more, sadly, what this solution is rather than, I mean, we all want the pretty garden, but at what process, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Neil? Mayor.
Okay, you said that you had horror stories of how these ordinances were misapplied. Do you have any incidents in Champaign that you think it was misapplied?
I do not, unfortunately. I cover such a large geographic area. I'd have to go back and talk to some of my members.
Yeah, because I would like to know of
sure.
the instances that you're talking about. That would be good.
I have heard back from some of we have a listserv that I can communicate with my colleagues statewide, and I've gotten some of the ones that were mentioned today in Aurora and so on. I've heard some not so attractive stories about.
That would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be great. If you could even email that just for us to think through what are the horror stories, as you say.
Sure.
What are those situations where ordinances like this don't work, so we can think through how our ordinance could be written to
we're always happy to help.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Milan?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our last speaker on this topic tonight is Eric Bussell. I hope I pronounced your name right, Eric.
That's right. No one ever
Welcome.
pronounces my name right.
Okay, you can pronounce it for us.
I
And tell
answer
us.
it pretty much anything by now.
Okay, good.
First
we
off,
can do that.
First off, thank you. I was involved in the Chamber Task Force, and I wasn't involved in all the meetings, but it means a lot that we had the opportunity to provide our feedback. I got to say that I feel awkward standing up here because I am 1,000% in support of the intent of what we're trying to accomplish by addressing the problems that you mentioned. The other side of that is that I'm opposed to this flat out, and I want to say, before I get into the details of why that is, I want to say I'm concerned. I'm not a political scientist, but I have a feeling that we're going to go through this, we're going to pull this off the table. And the things that I would agree with the bill in terms of empowering a landlord to deal with nuisance, I'm afraid what we're going to do is we're going to cherry pick something, and what we're going to do is we are going to strengthen the inability of a landlord to deal with a nuisance by saying we can't deal with a nuisance. I believe it's in topic number 9, where we're going to say we can't address someone who's conducting nuisance and causing problems. And I understand we have to deal with the rights of those who conduct nuisances, and I know Urbana likes to step up and protect those who are criminals and do those things, but at the same time, as we address those and we address those rights, and we should also address the ability of the landlords and the people it impacts on those properties just the same. In terms of this ordinance, most of the issues that I have concerns with were addressed in the write-up that you received. I'm not going to repeat those. But I want to say that I'm a small business owner. I'm an entrepreneur. I have what I think is a sizable property investment in Urbana. And in a nutshell, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a risk taker, all right? And I think the people like me are the people you want to attract to Urbana. And when I look at a deal, or I look at a risk, or if I am a real estate agent, or I'm talking to somebody who's looking at property or a business, the risk takers deal with a lot of uncertainty in the world. I mean, there's a lot that we can't control. And it's scary sometimes, but we do it anyway because that's what we do. We go after it. And in this bill, as I read it, there's nothing in this bill that tells me what a problem property is, other than the police reports, which isn't good enough for me. It doesn't tell me what the likely mediation is. It just tells me that there is one. Now, I feel pretty confident that I would never be a landlord that would come under this bill, and I feel pretty good about that. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure that's good enough, because you're asking me as a risk taker to take on more additional risk that I can't control, and essentially making me responsible for the criminal activities of those in my properties that I can't control. I just hope that everyone here reflects on that if we're going to be business friendly in Urbana, it's not by, be careful how I word this, it's by making things more clear, providing clarity whether or not we agree with everything in these proposed bills. It's just saying, as a potential person who might invest, just tell me what I'm up against, tell me what your expectations are so that I can exceed them. I don't know what the expectations are in this bill. I don't know how I could exceed them, and I think that's the root of the problem that I have. So thank you for your time, and appreciate again the opportunity that you've taken busy time out of your schedule to come talk to us and our concerns. And I hope as we move forward that we will be proactive in getting the business community, who's not always the most vocal, who's not the majority, but I think you want people like us saying good things about Urbana and not spending our time fighting wording like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Eric? Thanks, Eric. Okay, we have one final speaker, Michael First, on the topic of the criminal nuisance ordinance as well.
Well, I read the ordinance, and actually it doesn't bother me very much, except for the way it seems to work. Say a property gets 3 calls, and then the city calls the owner in for an abatement, okay? It makes quite some sense that most of the time the city and the owner will come to some agreement, okay? But I can imagine circumstances where it could get a bit difficult, okay? And that the owner or the city might want the owner to do things that are onerous. And I think an example of that occurred when we had, was it on Philo in Washington? There was this liquor store, and there was a lot of criminal activity around the liquor store. Okay, so the question is, what in a circumstance like that, what should the owner be required to do? Put up lights? Hire security guards? Should the city be able to coerce an owner to hire a security guard? I don't know, but that may be going too far. Okay, so I think it's important for the ordinance to maybe state what type of things can be included in this, in this abatement plan. An abatement plan can include these things. And most of the time, I don't think it'll be controversial, but we will get stuck. We could theoretically get stuck occasionally, and I think that section needs to be revised just to specify what types of things can be included in an abatement plan, and what happens if the city and the owner really don't agree. How does that get resolved? There could be a hearing process. Again, it would be very rare, hopefully, but it could happen. It probably would happen. That's all I had to say about that.
Any questions? Thanks very much. Okay, that was all of our public input, so now we will turn to council questions and discussion on this ordinance. David.
Well, this is the second time we've seen this. This came by in early this year, and I remember reading some articles about various forms of this ordinance in other cities. Remember reading that over New Year's, and at that time, a lot of us had some pretty serious objections to it. And I was, at the time, opposed to it. And I said, let's see if it's possible to fix it up to become something that I can support. And here it is a year later, and I find that I still just can't support it. My position is not that I think that we need to send it back to the baker, or put it back in the oven and see if we can hang more bits off of this and more safety guards on top of the safety guards and that sort of thing. I think the bill, or the ordinance, is just at root wrong-headed. I think that we've got a strong sense that we support the goals of the bill, and I think that there's a strong sense that the way that it goes about it is irreparable. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to move that we table this ordinance indefinitely.
Second.
Okay. A motion and a second. What other discussion do we have of tabling or of view?
What does that mean?
Yeah,
As the
maybe
newcomer to the council, can you
if
explain
the
what
clerk
that
could
means?
describe a little, whether, and is it a debatable motion?
You can discuss it, but when you table it indefinitely, that means that it's gone. It's gone.
And is that motion a debatable motion, or it's not like a motion to defer?
It's not a motion to
that we can
defer. A
discuss.
motion to table means that you're done with it, and to table it indefinitely means that you are putting it on the table, not to return again.
Okay.
I firmly second it.
Yeah. A motion to lay on the table is not debatable? Okay.
Let
Well,
me
then,
check real quick.
Yeah, it might be good to check.
Okay.
Do you have a Robert's Rules there?
Doesn't everybody bring?
Oh, yeah. I
Bring them
got
every
mine in
week?
my back pocket.
No, I have the smaller guide that doesn't include that particular motion.
Can you look it up?
Speaking to the mic there.
Kurt said
Yeah,
it's
we
not
can't hear
debatable.
you.
It's not a debatable motion according to Wikipedia's reference to Robert's Rules of Order here, you know?
And
Well,
Kurt says
if we're citing Wikipedia rather
There it
than
is, right
Robert,
here.
I guess.
It's Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, I trust Kurt Borman. So in that case, we'll vote on that motion to lay it on the table indefinitely, and I'd ask for a show of hands. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye, raising a hand. All those opposed, same sign. 4-3, so I believe that motion passes, and I believe that we'll table that item, and I saw 4 hands. I believe, raise the 4 hands again. I believe I saw Dennis's hand there at the end, along with David's, Heather's, and Diane's. So I believe that motion passes, and item number 8, unless I'm incorrect, item number 8 is tabled, and we would move on tonight to item number 9, discussion of... Item number 9 is a discussion of criminal trespass applied to tenants' invited guests, and there was specific wording about this put on the agenda by Dave Garrig and Charlie Smythe. Did one of you want to speak to this and introduce it?
Well, actually,
David?
what I'd like to do at this point is withdraw it.
Okay, unless there's anyone who objects, we'll simply withdraw that item from the agenda and move on to item number 10, It is about 9:45, so I just wanted to remind people we have, I think, 6 items left on tonight's agenda. And so we will try to take questions, and please be succinct and brief in comments. Item 10 is an ordinance. This is an annual tax levy ordinance. The annual tax levy ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois for the year beginning July 1, 2009 and ending June 30th, 2010. Our City Comptroller, Ron Eldridge, is here to tell us about the ordinance. And actually, all 3 pieces together, the annual tax levy ordinance along with the ordinance abating the tax levy for the general obligation bonds, and the ordinance, the resolution directing the county clerk to abate the tax levy for the general corporate purpose for the year beginning July 1. If you could speak to all 3 of those, we can take them in omnibus fashion and send them all off to council if that's the will of the group in omnibus fashion as well. Ron?
Good evening. Yes, the first ordinance is the ordinance that levies our taxes that will be paid next year. And a couple places in the ordinance, it does instruct the county clerk to, if this amount that's in the ordinance causes us to have a tax levy of above $1.29, which is our current rate, it instructs the county clerk to lower that amount down to the $1.29. And then the resolution, the third item, goes hand in hand with that. When we don't actually make them calculate that, but when we find out what the assessed value is in April, we actually calculate that for them and take the resolution to them, tell them what the amount is to make sure that it comes out to $1.29. I did have some people concerned about the little bill flyer that was in the newspaper that indicates that 7.5%. That's really not correct. We have to establish a high ceiling amount because we want to make sure we hit the $1.29. We don't know what the assessed value will actually be, and also we have to levy because of the Carl problem, in which we have to levy the Carl taxes but don't have those available to spend. So because of that, we have to put this high 7.5% rate, even though we know that will not occur. Actually, since the rate's going to stay the same, the only way a homeowner would pay any more money to the City of Urbana is if the value of their home goes up, because that's the formula. Assessed value, which is a third of the value of your home, times the tax rate. Tax rate stays the same. On average, we believe that the assessed value in Urbana next year will go up 2.5% on current homeowners, on average. Now, I know there's going to be a few homes that are going to maybe call me and say, you said 2.5% and mine went up 3.5%. Yeah, that can be true. There are also those that will not go up 2.5%, so they pay less. What does 2.5% represent on a home that's valued about $175,000? That would represent about an extra $19 that the city would be asking them to pay next year. A couple other points about the tax levy. Since 1999, the city has reduced the rate from $1.47 at that time to the current $1.29. And over that 10-year period, that has saved that same homeowner a little over $1,000 in taxes that they would have paid to Urbana if the rate had stayed at the $1.47. Urbana's tax rate at $1.29 is approximately in the middle of many of the cities in Central Illinois that we like to compare ourselves to. I checked Normal is $1.17, a little slightly lower. Decatur's $1.23, Bloomington $1.27, Champaign $1.29. Rantoul $1.66, Danville $1.78. So we're about right in the middle of those cities that we kind of compare ourselves to. One thing about the taxes, our ability to affect the total amount paid is very limited in that we're only about 15% of that total tax bill. Albeit the school district being the largest, 54%. Over the last 10 years, the overall tax rate paid, including all the governments, also has decreased in Urbana from about $9.10 to $8.22. And that has saved that same homeowner a little over $5,000 over that 10-year period in taxes that they would have paid. And that has occurred even though the voters, taxpayers themselves, have approved 6 different referendums to increase property tax rates during that time. So the governments, I think, have truly been trying to keep a handle on the tax rates over this period. The second ordinance is an ordinance that abates, tells the county clerk not to levy taxes. This is on some TIF bonds that we did on the parking garage in downtown, and they were issued under our general faith credit so that we could get a lower tax rate. And so the county clerk has on file an ordinance passed by this council that tells them to levy these taxes unless we tell them not to. We have monies in the TIF to pay the bonds, so we're telling the county clerk not to levy those taxes. So those are the 3 items on property taxes.
Any questions for Ron? Motion would be in order for all 3 in omnibus fashion.
A second.
Motion by Charlie, okay, seconded by Robert. Dennis was a close third. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. 1 nay. We'll
If I
see
can be
those.
recognized.
Yes.
I'd like to, it's a point of clarification here, order, whatever.
Yes, Mr. Smythe.
Under Robert's Rules of Order, if I'd actually had a chance to read the whole thing, basically Roberts states that the use of the motion to table to kill a motion is improper because a majority vote should not be sufficient to permanently cut off debate on a main motion. I would suggest that we take a 5-minute recess while we consult with our legal staff and so on before we allow the previous motion to stand.
Given that it's almost 10 o'clock, actually, I would propose we continue discussing our topics and let the clerk or legal staff check on that, but if we continue hearing staff presentations and talking, I know we have a presentation next from community development, just so that our meeting can move ahead, and then when we have some answer to that, or at the end, if we have to wait 5 minutes, we still could, but just so that we can keep staff presentations going, given that it's 10 to 10.
Yeah, really, it basically, to permanently kill this from debate, it needs a 2/3 majority vote, is basically what this is saying. So.
Well, yeah, we definitely want to check on Robert's rules and about motions to table and make sure we do it right. So we just passed those 3 items, the ordinance, and the resolution, and sent them to next week's council meeting. Next on our agenda is item number 13. This is from Community Development. This is an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of an annexation agreement at 1913 Brownfield Road for Maxie and Ruth Overmeyer. And it looks like we have Robert Myers here to tell us about this item.
Hi. Quickly, Maxie and Ruth Overmeyer are requesting an annexation agreement for property at 1913 Brownfield Road. It's about 1/3 of an acre. It's located on Brownfield Road, north of I-74. And at your October 19th meeting, the Urbana City Council approved an emergency motion allowing connection of this property to the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District sewer system, with the understanding that the Overmeyers would sign an annexation agreement shortly thereafter. What you have before you tonight is an annexation agreement, and if you should forward it to next city council meeting, a public hearing would be held on that night, and that would be on for approval for October 16th. The public hearing will be at 7 p.m. In your packet, you have an annexation agreement signed by the property owners, and they're here tonight to answer any questions should you have any.
They've been very patiently waiting back there. Thank you very much. Any questions or a motion would be in order?
I would move
Heather?
that we send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Heather and seconded by Diane. Any questions or discussion about this ordinance?
Just one.
Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, and just as clarification, actual annexation doesn't occur until contiguous land is surrounding their property, correct?
Right.
It's just potential in the future.
Right. This would be an agreement of the current owners and all future owners for the next 20 years that should the city boundaries come out and actually touch the property, then they would agree to file an annexation petition.
It's kind of getting your cake and eating it too, isn't it?
What's that?
Oh, never mind. That's just a thought.
Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor of sending this to council, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll see that next week at City Council for final approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have item number 14 on our agenda. This is from legal. This is ordinance 2009-11-120, an ordinance amending section 11-49 of the Urbana City Code for nuisance abatement liens. And it looks like we have Kurt Borman here. Kurt?
This is just a 2-word amendment. The city sometimes will place liens on property when the city has to abate nuisances and doesn't isn't reimbursed from the property owner. Currently, we have 60 days to do that from the time we actually take the action to abate the nuisance. We'd like to amend the ordinance to allow us up to a year to put a lien on property if we have to do that. The reason for that is that the state law used to be 60 days, but in August it was changed to a year. So we're simply trying to match what the state law allows us to do, and to give us more of a time to work these cases out without having to put the lien on.
Any questions? Yeah, a motion from Robert.
Second.
A second from Dennis. Any questions for Kurt or discussion? Hearing none, would all those in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. That was a motion, remind me, by Robert and seconded by Dennis? Sound right? Okay, thanks. Next, we have item 15. This is a discussion topic, consideration of an ordinance amending Section 118 of the Urbana City Code. This is regarding the minimum fine schedule for certain violations, and again, an item from legal. Kurt?
Under the city code, a number of ordinances have minimum fines established where people can pay a fine within 14 days of receiving a notice to appear and avoid going to court and avoid having the city file a complaint in court. These fines have not been changed in several years, and we were asked to update the fine schedule to increase most of the fines to kind of offset our additional costs and so forth. And so what we've done is we've looked at other cities, Champaign and other comparable cities, and to get an idea of what the range of fines is, and have proposed new fines accordingly.
Any questions for Kurt? Dennis?
So I looked through your fine schedule, which mostly is fine, but there were a few things that just as an individual, just as a human being, I kind of wondered about. And one of them originally, I guess the biggest one I have was the fine for a curfew violation. And really I'm thinking about young people and minors. I mean, really they're the people who are under the curfew law. And the fine originally had been graduated, first, second, and third offense, as is mentioned on Exhibit A2, middle of the page there, number 15-63. So crossed out we had first offense, $25, second offense, $50, third offense, $75, and then violations by the parent and the guardian also getting some fines. So they've been jumping up then from $25 to $165 is the suggested new fine. And I think that's burdensome on families. And I mean, a lot of kids get into trouble, and yes, they disobey curfew laws. But if I'm thinking about the people who are in Scottswood Manor, who probably have a bunch of people walking around at night who are disobeying curfew, but they're also the most disadvantaged members of our community, and on rental of assistance and support, and are making decisions about whether they can buy food that week. And I think that the fine for this instance is excessive, and so I would like to have a discussion about that. If we're going to increase the fines, I'd rather not increase to such a huge degree the curfew fine. And then I just disagree about. I know that it's only like $30, but the fine that increases shooting off fireworks and open burning, because I mean some of us have fire pits in our yard, or maybe we're not supposed to, or we have movable pan fireplaces which you can move in and out. And I guess that's considered a legal way of having a fire pit. But if you were doing that, and if the police stopped in your yard and charged you $165 for having hot dogs that night with guests, I would be upset. Okay, so I disagree about that fine. And finally, liquor violations, identification offenses going up to $200 per instance. And again, we're talking about college students, and I think that's one that I'm not sure about. Maybe it's fine, but I just think that it's not exactly to the same severity as transporting liquor in a motor vehicle or selling liquor to drunks. I don't know, on Green Thursday or whatever it is that happens at the campus. All these people are going to get hit with fines. Not too many of them are going to be in Urbana, but I just think it's somewhat excessive, perhaps. So those are my questions, and I'd like to get some input from other members.
Okay, thanks. David, and then Robert.
I have a few questions, same sort of thing. Let's try it with the microphone this time. A few cases where the fines have gone from $50 to $300, where it's a six-fold jump. I think in some cases, and with first offense for curfew, that's almost a seven-fold jump. And I don't object to keeping the fees in line, but I think the fee structure had been set earlier with the idea that there were a few things that had been selected so that it wasn't sort of the same fine across the board. And so in particular, I'd like to make an amendment for 13.2 loitering in the library, 1559 loitering as a miscellaneous offense, and let's see. And I'd like to, for 1563, curfew for minors, in each of those cases, I'd like to propose $100.
Okay, that's a motion by Dave Garrick.
I think one fine is
Okay.
Is okay. Yeah.
So the
All of those you want to be 100, loitering, and then the curfew, is that your?
Yes.
Okay.
Each of those would be a $100 fine.
So to repeat the motion, I think the motion is that 13-2 loitering
Yes.
would become $100. 15-59 loitering would become $100.
Yes.
And 15-63 curfew for minors would be a flat $100.
Yes.
Is
So-
there a second?
Or more discussion? Or
Okay, I think for now that motion fails. We'll see. We can have more discussion and see if other people want to take it up. Questions? Diane?
I just had a question on the library fine increases. Did you consult with the library staff or director to get a sense of what they thought?
No, the library fine increase is based on comparable fines in Chapter 15. In other words, creating disturbances, loitering, mutilating, they all have equivalents in Chapter 15.
Okay.
Takes loitering just by itself.
Any other
Just
questions?
one by one, each of that.
Or discussion? I could throw in 2 cents briefly. Yeah, I support, Dennis, the point you made about curfew. I agree. I was on council last time we took up curfew. There was a lot of discussion. We heard from many community members. We heard from parents who said it's hard for them as parents to sometimes be responsible for their children's behavior, though they understand that they are under curfew ordinances. But we ended up with a 25, 50, 75 graduated structure so that there was some incremental, escalation. And I, in general, would support that concept and would support some happy medium between, $25 and $165. And a few of the others, the loitering and the library things, I agree that I would support some moderate medium. In general, I support these fee increases and support us keeping up periodically through the years with increased fees. But those are the few that stuck out to me.
Yeah,
Mayor.
I'd like to suggest on the curfew for minors that we would reduce these two for graduating, go 50, 75.
If that's a motion, I second it, because that's what I drew up.
Yeah, the mayor doesn't.
All right,
Then if you'd
then
like
I
to
make a motion.
I'll second it.
I'll make that motion because that's the schedule that I devised just 2 seconds ago
Okay.
myself.
Okay, so there's a motion from Dennis. Did I hear a second?
Yeah, it's seconded over here.
Okay,
So
seconded.
to be clear, you wanted to not only
Seconded
make
by
the motion,
Charlie.
but also take credit for it.
Yeah.
That's correct. This time I'm going to do that.
So that's a motion to amend this proposal in section 1563, curfew for minors, to leave the first, second, third offense.
Yes.
Both for minors and for parents, and those dollar amounts would be 50, 75, and 100.
And then duplicate it.
Yes,
For
parents,
the parents, guardians.
50, 75, and 100, and that was seconded by Charlie. Is there any discussion about that amendment? Would all those in favor say aye of the amendment, please?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that amendment carries, so that amendment has been accepted. We're back to general discussion on the overall topic. David?
Well, let me try this again with just the loitering ones and see whether that was the objection with the last time around. Just for 13-2 and 1559, I'd suggest $100 rather than $300. That's loitering at the library and loitering not at the library.
Okay. Okay, a motion by David, seconded by Charlie. Is there any other discussion? Would all those in favor of the amendment please say aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that carries. So 13-2 and 15-59 are now $100. And we're back to discussion. Any other general questions on the full proposal? Okay, Diane?
23-144, riding on sidewalks. Is that riding a bicycle, or is it riding any motorized vehicle, or what?
And where prohibited, I believe, is
Needs to be
only
written.
in the downtown. Are the ordinance?
We should specify that.
In our neighborhood, I'm not letting them on the street.
Right. I think in this ordinance, in 23-144, where that's written out, I believe it describes. We can certainly check on that.
Yeah. Well, I know that 23-109 is the bicycle riding downtown.
Oh.
Well, 2044.
23-144.
23-144. Oh, right, okay.
Right.
I could go upstairs. I could go upstairs and get that. I could get chapter 23, unless Phyllis, you have one here. With the code, do you have the code here?
Okay. We could run up and get it. We could also check. I mean, this is just committee, so we can all take time to
Question
look
that.
into the
Just
exact
curious.
descriptions
Sure.
before a final vote on this at a subsequent council meeting. Yeah. Are there any other, okay, Heather, I'll go from this end.
Just a comment, and that is, in the tough economic times that we're in, it seems to me like this is more of a money-making thing than it is, because we're almost doubling, most of these items are almost being doubled, and I think there has to be a better way than making these fines our source of extra income into the city. I believe that if something was $50 instead of making it $100, let's make it $75. I mean, we're in tough times, and I just think that there needs to be a lot more thoughtful consideration taking that into account when we're passing fines like this in these days.
Other discussion? Well, Charlie?
Well, in general, I think it's a lot easier whenever we can have our ordinances, fines, regulations, similar to Champagne's. It helps police, it helps the citizens to simplify things in a Twin City type situation. I'm a firm believer, too, though, that when we have when we take a progressive step forward, like with recycling or something like that, we're going to be different. The, rental registration is another thing. We're different. But where we are basically, doing the same thing, the more uniformity we can, I think it just makes it easier, especially with the large student population that we have here. So I have no problem with raising these prices more or less to inflation, and then we've set some of them they're jumping too much down. Another one that comes to mind is the disorderly conduct one, which also jumps from 50 to 300. I could see bringing that one down, so I'll move that one to $100.
Second.
The number for that one,
that one is 1560.
So the motion, I believe, is 1560, disorderly conduct, currently $50, proposed $300, and the motion would be $100? Is that
Yeah.
right, Charlie? Okay. Is there anyone who would want to second that motion?
Second,
yeah.
Seconded by David. Any discussion of that motion? All those, Kurt? Yeah.
I can't speak to what citations get paid by mail. I can only speak to the violations that go to court, because I prosecute every ordinance in the city except for parking. What I can tell you about disorderly conduct is that is typically a couple of things. It's typically threatening somebody. It's threatening bodily harm to somebody. And the second situation where it's often used, if there's not a threat, is public fights, brawling. It's usually a case where it's like a consensual, like two people decide to go at it, and they go and fight. So a lot of times that can happen in public and so forth.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. Motion withdrawn. Dennis?
Returning to my litany of concerns, I suggest that we not change the open burning fee or fine and leave it at $135.
Okay, a motion, that's item 11-19, to remain at $135 instead of increase to $165. A second by Heather. Any discussion or questions? Diane?
I may be wrong, but I think it's okay in the city of Urbana to have a fire pit where you can cook food over, and you can have your little containers with logs. You can have a fire in your backyard. I think this must refer more to like burning leaves or yard waste or trash in your yard. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. The ordinance specifically prohibits the open burning of paper, leaves, refuse, garbage, any other materials, including construction materials, demolition materials, and so forth. But grilling, you're correct, that is allowed. That is not prohibited.
So as long as you have marshmallows or hot dogs close at hand, you're okay.
Campfires are perfectly legal. Fires for recreational purposes are perfectly legal.
Okay, well, maybe I don't.
Okay.
I can withdraw my motion.
Okay, that motion is withdrawn. Any other discussion?
Kurt, did you get the information on the riding ordinances?
Yes, I did. 23-109, unlawful riding, refers to the prohibition against riding in any vehicle, in any portion of a vehicle that's not designated for passengers.
Like riding on the handlebars.
Right. Well, it says that the provision shall not apply to persons riding within truck bodies in space intended for merchandise or in an organized parade.
Okay. Technicalities,
What
yeah.
about the, can I be?
Sure.
Go ahead, Heather, yeah.
What about the 23-144 riding on sidewalks?
That was the one that was referred to. No person shall ride a bicycle upon a sidewalk within the central business district.
I would like to comment on that. We've had a lot of complaints from merchants on Main Street. We're going to put up bigger signs. And Bill Gray's holding off on signs because I'd like to have a higher fine. Because we have people that almost get hit by bicycles, and I think we need to mention this to them. And there's a fine on there. It's not too bad.
Charlie?
Well, I will point out that the real solution to bicycles on the sidewalk in downtown is to have bicycle lanes on Main Street where we shouldn't have 4 lanes of traffic anyway. So, and the sooner we get that done, the sooner we'll have a safer and more pedestrian, bike, and neighborhood-friendly downtown. I think the sooner we can get 3-lane, traffic calming measures taken in downtown, the sooner we'll find that people will start taking advantage of that friendly environment. We're going to have shopping, the Friday evening events here that are coming up. You really don't want to be in downtown where you've got 4 lanes of traffic and cars zooming by you, 2 lanes in each direction, and you're trying to get across the street or trying to be in a business. I mean, we really need to take, if you really want to deal with bicycles, you can solve the bicycle problem, and you can improve the atmosphere in downtown by just taking and drawing 3 lines down the street instead of 4.
Any other discussion of fine adjustments? Okay, we didn't have a motion actually to send this to council. I know it was listed as a discussion item. We've made some amendments to the recommendation, but at this point, if people would like, we could send this to council for a vote. It's up to the will of the group if you feel it's ready. Okay.
I'll second.
Moved.
Was there a reason this wasn't?
It's ready to go.
It is ready?
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Robert, seconded by Dave Gehrig. Any other questions or adjustments?
Clarify that.
Yes.
As modified?
Yes, as modified, as modified. Going once, going twice. Okay, would all those in favor of sending this to council please say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Okay. That will go to the Urbana City Council. We return then to the question of parliamentary order and the disposition of item number 8 on our agenda. I wonder if I could first recognize the clerk and see what she found, and we'll see if we can solve it without a recess to go study our books together.
Okay, what Robert's rules said about lay on the table for the part that Charlie was talking about, said modified rules for lay on the table make it clear that while this motion may never be used with the purpose of killing the pending motion without debate, it is proper to use it to set aside the pending question in order to bring another motion which the majority may consider more urgently important. So if you were going to bring another motion that you thought was much more important than the one that was already there, and you wanted to do that, then you could have put this on the table pending another motion coming. However, according to the ranking of the motions, to lay on the table, yes, it takes a second. Is it amendable? No. Is it debatable? No. It takes a majority. Can you reconsider? No.
It takes just a simple majority?
A simple majority, not a 2/3, according to what I got from Robert's rule.
Okay, but again, that motion would just put it off to a future time so that another urgent item could come up first, and you'd be back to that motion.
You could have, if you lay it on the table, you have to bring it back before you close at the end of that meeting. However, if you postpone it to a time certain, then you can set a date for it to come back, and then you can bring it back and discuss it, bring another motion if that's what you want to do. But if you want to lay it on the table indefinitely, it's gone.
Okay, thank you. So I'll recognize David first.
Okay, my intent was to basically to kill it. But if it turns out that this is, and that's why I said let's kill it. If it turns out that this is not, let's see, it's something that's technically possible but does not meet the spirit of what the rules of debate of Robert's Rules of Order, then my understanding is that we can undo it as long as it's part of this session. That
well, as the chair here, lay on the table, from what I'm understanding from the clerk, and correct me if you disagree, is a way to temporarily put something off, to take something else of more importance up first. So in a sense, we've done that. We just put off number 8 and did the rest of our agenda. And that motion did pass when we took a vote on it. But basically, item number 8 will come back to us. We can't close this meeting without taking up number 8 or postponing it to a time certain, because lay on the table does not just
Except the
kill
actual,
something
the actual
indefinitely.
motion that I made was to postpone indefinitely, I think.
And that he can do, that means that it's dead, that it doesn't come back again.
So that's
Well,
sort of identical to defeating.
To postpone
the item.
indefinitely, in order at any time, majority vote required, followed by an immediate motion for the previous question. So you have to call the previous question, which requires a 2/3 vote.
Sorry, say that again?
If the motion is to postpone indefinitely, in order at any time, and a majority vote is sufficient, it has to permanently kill it, has to be followed by an immediate motion for the previous question, which,
Okay.
which, basically, so the majority vote has suspended debate essentially. It's postponed indefinitely, but to permanently kill the question, nobody's called the question. Okay, so to actually kill it, well, then I'm going to call a question on it.
Okay, so you're calling for a vote of item 8.
Of item 8, yeah.
Of sending
Yeah,
item 8 to
well-
council.
Can you send it to a committee?
That was my original intent, which is what I said up front early on, was that I was going to send this to committee. I've sent you all a copy of a proposed ordinance, okay, so, which is a combination of, I think that the proper way to do this is to, I thought the motion was to lay on the table.
No, to permanent,
People want to work on it, so.
Yeah. Yeah, the motion was to lay on the table, and he expressed that his intent was to indefinitely put it off.
Yeah, that's two different motions in here. Postponing indefinitely is one motion. Laying on the table is a different motion. Which one was made?
If he lays it on the table and states that he's laying it on the table indefinitely, he needed a second, which he got immediately from Heather. At that point, it killed it completely. There was nothing else that needed to be done with it. However, you all are the council, and you can do what you want.
Yeah, I'd like to,
Stated that if you wanted to, if any council person wanted to revive it, they would have to have immediately called in question that ruling. That was not done.
And you can't, can I be recommended?
Yes, Heather.
Kurt, can you call a question after it's been motioned and seconded the way that we did it?
and there actually
you
was
call
not
the
an
question-
original motion. We had
killed
discussion and
it,
we heard
and
public
then,
input.
I mean,
Excuse me, yeah, we actually never had an original motion to even pass the item or to send it to committee or to send it to another meeting. There was no original motion. We simply heard from the mayor, heard from staff, and heard from the public on item number 8. And at the beginning of our discussion, laid it on the table. Clerk, were you going to?
Yeah, if I could, maybe the best thing to do would just read you what this says, and then you'll understand. But I think the real issue here is there was no original motion to work from here. Okay, so in United States parliamentary practice, approval of a motion to table or lay on the table immediately sets aside the pending main motion and all pending subsidiary motions. The motion is not debatable. Beyond these characteristics, the purpose and effect of the motion to table vary according to which parliamentary authority is being used. The motion requires a majority vote except as indicated below. Under Robert's Rules of Order, the subsidiary motion to table is properly used only when it is necessary to suspend consideration of a main motion in order to deal with another matter that has come up unexpectedly and which must be dealt with before the pending motion can be properly addressed. It has, however, become common to misuse the motion to end consideration of the pending main motion without debate, or to mistakenly assume that its adoption prevents further consideration of the main motion at all or until a specified time. A main motion that has been laid on the table may be taken up again by adoption of a motion to take from the table. This motion is not debatable and requires a majority for adoption. A motion may be taken from the table only until the end of the next session, commonly the next meeting, after the one in which it was laid on the table, if that session occurs within 3 months after the session in which it was laid on the table. If there is no session within those 3 months, the motion may only be taken from the table during the current session. If these time limits are not met, the motion dies. Roberts states that the use of the motion to table to kill a motion is improper because a majority vote should not be sufficient to permanently cut off debate on a main motion. Roberts recommends that a member seeking to avoid a direct vote on a main motion while immediately cutting off debate instead make a motion that requires a 2/3 vote, either an objection to consideration of the question, which is in order only before debate has begun and requires a 2/3 vote to block further consideration of the main motion, or a motion to postpone indefinitely in order at any time, a majority vote required, followed by an immediate motion for the previous question, 2/3 vote required. One of the disadvantages of trying to kill a measure by laying it on the table is that if some opponents of the measure subsequently leave the meeting, a temporary majority favoring the measure can take it from the table and act on it, or they may do so at a future session held within the next quarterly time interval. The Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure tries to clarify this whole system a little bit more, but we don't follow that. We follow Robert's rules. The issue here is that we didn't even have a motion to work with. We simply had a motion to postpone discussion of this indefinitely. So if you really want to kill it, it really should be done with a 2/3 vote of this group.
Or, and I believe that's correct, but also, or simply defeating it, right? If the ordinance was defeated 4-3, we would end our consideration of it and move on with the meeting just as well. I think 2/3 would kill debate so that, we could come to a vote, but a 4-3 vote, a simple majority would be needed to defeat the item.
Right.
Should someone want to make that.
And we don't even have a motion to defeat.
Yeah. So
that's why, Roberts lays out this, that either you make an objection to consideration of the question, which would have been the proper thing to do because we hadn't begun debate, or a motion to postpone indefinitely followed by the previous question. And the previous question was not called here,
yeah.
I don't know how you deal with it. All I know is that I wanted time to look at this in a calmer fashion down the road, because everyone was saying, well, everybody's saying Champagne's ordinance works. What can we do? I thought I had agreement, from talking to different council members that I'd be given a chance to do this. I'm not really wedded to this idea one way or the other, but I do want to at least get a chance to get it out there and see if there was something that could be created. Diane was talking about a model ordinance. How can you create a model ordinance if you kill debate?
Yes, and I believe you are right that debate is allowed unless 2/3 really block debate. I do want to ask, actually, before we do other motions and questions, I would like to get a simple show of hands to generally sort of understand the will of this group. First, how many people of the group, I'll ask you to raise your hand, are interested in considering this topic? It's already 10:30, so it would likely be at some other time, but continuing to work towards some consensus to refine wording to come to some agreement. Or the second show of hands is how many people would simply like to defeat the topic and to not have us or staff spend further time considering it. So the first show of hands would be the people that really would like to go further, to discuss, likely at a subsequent meeting and work on it, versus the people who would simply like to stop.
I need a third option.
Yes, a third option?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason I voted the way I did is I think the version we have in front of us has just become toxic. It's been beaten to death, and I would prefer to just bury it and start over if we're going to start over. I would also like to, before we start over, if we choose to go down that route, is to sit back and say, okay, what are our goals again? What groups do we want to include in this process? Is an ordinance of this nature the route to go? But to simply refine language and fiddle around and tweak wording, I think is just going to be counterproductive. It's like that newspaper rack. I mean, you just sometimes cut your losses and start over. And I would really like to, if we're going to address this, and I got the sense that the public is willing to participate in this, but I don't want to spend any more time on this ordinance that's been hanging around for a year, and I mean, I wasn't even on the council for half of that time, but I'm already tired of it. And I started out really wanting this, and I still would like to have a tool to address the problem, but this is not it, and that's why I would just like to see it go away and start with a blank slate, because I don't think it's fixable, truly. And I haven't even seen what Charlie wrote, and I'm sure it's 10 times better than what we had before us when you get down to it, but I think we need to kill this and then sit back and, you know, take some time and think about where do we want to go with this,
Okay.
and involve other people.
I'm going to recognize Heather and Dennis and David as well, to hear people's input on how they would like to proceed. Heather?
I just want to kill this thing. It's not, I mean, there was not one person in the audience tonight that came forward and said, yay, let's do this. Not one person. And for that, I believe that it is not a business-friendly ordinance, and for that reason, I don't want to see it.
In any form?
In any form.
Dennis, I saw your hand next.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of people in the room, not currently, but earlier, who actually think they understand what already happened, except they don't really understand that something now is happening again, had a will to do, you know, maybe address the problem in some appropriate manner. But I myself, and okay, I didn't really research I didn't really study it until yesterday when I had time on Sunday, and I came up with, I think, I don't know, 18 to 20 Post-its and underlined things which I felt were, well, as it was mentioned before, were vague, needed definition, maybe needed rethinking, and I understand the intent of the task force, but I think that the I'm actually thinking that if we killed this, there might be a simpler and more direct ordinance that we could see or be created, and I'm kind of interested in finding out what David Gearing and Charlie Smythe have come up with. But I would like to start fresh with something. Brandon, you, okay, whomever. That's fine. I think the thing can be addressed. I have to say that I've spent a lot of time in the Scottswood Manor apartments over the last week, and I have heard that people are very concerned about what would happen if this apartment complex, which has many disadvantaged and challenged people as far as financial resources go, were to be closed under this ordinance. Where would they go and what would they do? So there is a perception that it's very dangerous to life and limb of people who are tenuously occupying space, you know. And so I think, yes, I would say let's just cut this one off and see something fresh and new and bring it up as a new ordinance, not a revision of this one.
So in the three options, just so I'm getting a sense where everybody stands.
Number 3.
Okay, was the third option of don't start with this language, simply start fresh, but try to work on some consensus together. Okay, I'll keep going on down the line. Mayor, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I have no objection to starting with what are the goals, and certainly the only reason that there's language in there about funding for replacing people who have to move is that this council asked for that, and the people who have experience with these ordinances tell us that that never happens, but people still want it. That was their perception, and so that's why it's dealt with in the ordinance. And so maybe now that we've had a chance to talk about this, we can say what the goals are and write a much shorter, cleaner ordinance. I know that Diane had said she wanted to take the stuff out about closing it, you know, under removing the rental registration, which is fine. I'm prepared to do that. And I think we could, the easiest thing to do is to start over. But I think it is a topic that needs to be addressed. And I will say that the people that were on the Neighborhood Safety Task Force are realtors too, as well as landlords. So we did get input and we did seek input, and I'm glad people are talking about it now, but we couldn't get the apartment owners to talk about it. So now that we're willing to talk, let's get some language and suggestions from them, and whoever wants to contribute.
Okay.
But I was not intending to send it back to the Neighborhood Safety Task Force. It was going to come back to this council, because Charlie said he wanted to come up with a different version.
Robert Lewis, did you want to weigh in on the amend this and keep working on it, kill it and give up entirely, or the start over option?
Well, my perspective is I did review and I talked to the mayor about it, and I went to the chamber and I talked to them about it. Yes, it's on. And I'm quite familiar with what the federal government requires in terms of code and all this stuff. And I think that from the members of the community that I serve, this would be well served for them, because we have situations where we have landlords that are in Arizona and all they're doing is milking the house, okay, or the apartment house, and there's a lot of activities going on that they don't even know exist, okay? And I think we need some concrete way of addressing this issue. Accountability, everybody's got to be accountable. And we have some serious social issues now that warrants this type of approach. I don't think that the original concept is the one that, without the specificity of what you really need, is not really there. But I think we can create that, and I think we need to start afresh and make it what can really serve people. I'm not so much concerned about accountability as I am making it work for all those engaged. I know that from my conversations with landlords, they call me on the phone, I'm appalled at this. I can't, do you know what's going on the council? I said, yes, I am. I'm quite familiar with what's going on in the council. But they came to the realization, I'm not going to mention any names, but they came to the realization that this will probably not really affect me. And, but there are sectors of the society, our society, that this will affect. And we need it badly. And I think that it behooves us to think outside the box when we do this and be very specific as to how we deal with it, and define all the character areas that are engaged so that nobody gets off the hook, but we deal with it. Okay? That's my view.
Okay, thanks. Next, Dave Gehrig. The three options again are amend this and go forward. Amend this and go forward, kill it and just stop work on it and not try again, or start afresh.
Let's try with this. We heard again and again tonight, and also over the last week, and really over the last year, that people are behind the goals of the ordinance and just could not get behind, could not rally behind the way that the ordinance was implemented. It's not a reflection on legal staff by any means. They've tried to get some, lots of input from a lot of different directions, and I think that they did a very good job, but ultimately this thing just struck me as an exercise in trying to convince a dog it was a cat. And it just, after a certain point, when your cat says roof, you know that something's wrong. Yeah, that's right. That trying to paste some extra whiskers on it is not going to help. So I think that I certainly support the intended goals. I think that we need to take a look at this in terms of the way that it works with the landlord-tenant, with the rental registration, see if there are other ways to do what it is that we're trying to do. But I think we also need to accept that. We tried this. We tried it. We pushed the rock up the hill for a long time, And in the end, we were not able to get, at the end, it rolled right back on us. So, right, so I think in this case, I think that there's strong interest in this council and in among the community, among our wide audience here, that we should continue with the looking at ways of addressing the neighborhood safety problems. This is certainly not a vote against neighborhood safety by any means, but I think it's time to realize that this shot, this direction, we tried it, and we took it as far as it went, and I think it's time to look at another direction.
Charlie, same question.
Yeah, well, it's 3 was what I was after, and that was my intention, because basically I wrote a whole new ordinance. That's, well, I mean, I based it on, the idea was that, let me back up. We heard this week in the different discussions, there were some valid objections, a lot of concern about subjectivity. I accept those. We have ordinances out there that are very specific. There was recognition, and this, I really walked away from the UBA meeting Friday afternoon, that there was recognition that a very specifically, carefully crafted tool would be acceptable. Okay, it was probably necessary for the city to do its job. What we're really after, and I wrote down the idea here, what I think our primary goal in this kind of an ordinance is, we don't want to penalize the owners, we don't want to penalize the tenants, we want to go after the people who are committing the crime. But what this ordinance is really trying to do is to reduce the environment in which the crime can occur. We want to reduce the opportunities for crime to occur. Okay, and so how do you, we're going after the environment, not after the people necessarily. And that's what abatement is all about, and that's what finally clicked with me, because originally I opposed this entirely. Okay, but what I've come to understand is what you're after is abatement of an environment that is conducive to crime. And so, that's what we have to target and go after. I think, we should make one more try at this. Other communities have it. And I thought, I put an ordinance together with Brandon. Really, it's the core of it is the Champaign ordinance with some of our better language wrapped around it. It wasn't that hard to do. But it has a couple of legal questions in there that need to be worked on. And it addressed many of the issues that were raised over the past week from different individuals. And, basically I want to put it out there and let people vet it. And, the different groups ought to vet it and give feedback on specific things. But at the core, it has the goal of going after the environment, and it's very careful. It reduces the issues that you asked for. It really addresses many of the issues that were taken up. And like I said, the core of it is the Champaign ordinance, which we know works. It's been used for 12 years, very carefully. Why reinvent the wheel? So if we can just simply take this up in February, I really would like to get through our goals. And get started on some other business. We have the holidays coming up, and we really need to finish the goals and get started down on some other things. Like I said, there's an ordinance out there that I've put together. I'd like to see people comment on it and see if there's something there that is the germ of a new ordinance, as Diane is requesting.
Okay, everybody's been recognized once. Dennis, do you have a second comment?
Yeah, I think that addressing environmental issues is very important for safety concerns, and this is something that landlords can truly address, the environment of their complex, of their apartment building. Yet, I will say that I do believe that crimes are committed by people, not by benches. And so, well, that a crime can occur in 10 minutes' time in an argument. But okay, I think that it's the right step, and at least it's something that the landlord or the property owner can deal with in a very concrete way concerning nuisance abatement, perhaps. So I'll be very interested to see your project.
Okay, so the total here, we had one person who said their preference would be to just kill it and stop working on it, and 5 others, the remainder of you, I think signaled that you are interested in not using this language, instead starting over, but trying to work on something. If I can try to tell you what I think I heard as the consensus, it was that we start with a conversation about goals, about what we're trying to accomplish, and at a high level about what the ordinance should do. Some of you said that you would support something that was shorter, cleaner, more specific, I think was the word I heard. So due process, all those sorts of things. So it sounds to me like the kind of motion that would be in order would be that we, a motion that we just defeat this text that was brought before us, and that we direct our staff and the mayor to schedule at an appropriate time a discussion about the goals, to start afresh at the beginning of what goals we want to accomplish, and work from there to see if we can put something together. That's I think what I hear you all saying as we went down the line, and at this point anybody's allowed to make motions about what to do next. Diane, I saw your hand first.
I move that we defeat ordinance number 2008-11-135.
Second.
Okay. Charlie, a discussion
Actually,
of that
I would
motion.
point out that we're in committee. This is not a council session.
right.
Yeah, we're in committee. So the simple fact that the motion doesn't go to council and doesn't go anywhere is not needed. All we need is a motion directing staff what we really want them to do.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, so if you want, to schedule something in, say, our first committee meeting in January, which is about the earliest I would want to possibly consider it, I would second such a motion to discuss the goals and then move forward. We can, between now and then, we can look at the ordinance I put together and,
There was a motion. I don't know if you want to defeat it, or, withdraw it, the motion to
I'll
just
withdraw
defeat
it.
this wording. Okay. Does anybody have a motion about when to take this up next or how to proceed? Heather, I see your hand.
David, I seconded yours because I wanted to defeat this ordinance specifically, and that's why I seconded your tabling it indefinitely. Go ahead. Right, so, I guess if we're not gonna discuss this ordinance anyway, why can't we go back to David's original motion to table it indefinitely, because we're not gonna take up this ordinance again anyway.
My point is that the ordinance is basic, as long as we don't do anything with it, as a committee, if we don't do anything with it, it's done. It's done.
Yes.
Okay? That's what I say. The only thing we can do if we don't send it to council, and there aren't 4 votes to send it to council, so it's in effect dead. Okay? Basically the ordinance as it's written isn't going to go anywhere. Okay, I won't support it. I wouldn't send it to council either. The proper thing to do is if 5 or 6 of us want to consider some new ordinance, then we should set a schedule for how we'd go about doing that with future committee meetings, public input, and so on. And what I would move is that at our first committee meeting in January, we lay out the goals of what we would want a very carefully crafted tool to do, centered around the idea that I raised earlier of reducing an environment in which crime can occur, reducing the opportunities for crime. That would cover issues related to, it would include, from my perspective, a very important issue that was raised by Esther Pat here of how do we improve how do we improve the police access or people's reporting of crimes in a way that they're assured that it's done anonymously. That's one aspect of this. okay? That's a topic that's related. If there are tenant-landlord issues that come into play, that would be another thing we'd have to consider. So there's a range of 4 or 5 things that we would probably take up in this discussion. I'm willing to tackle what those pieces are and circulate them amongst us. But, so I would move that we drop discussion of this and we take up a very carefully crafted, God, it's so late.
Yes, state your motion here for us.
My motion is that we take up this issue anew, first committee meeting in January, with the purpose of drafting a new ordinance.
I second.
Okay. Seconded by Robert Lewis was the first one I heard. Is there any discussion about that motion to consider this in January? David?
I'd just like to say, go Yankees.
Okay, fair enough. Diane?
I would just like to make sure that we invite the
Diane.
stakeholders to that discussion, specifically invite the stakeholders to that discussion, so that they are involved from the get-go.
So noted. Yeah, Robert? Any other discussion? Okay, so the motion on the floor is to take this topic up anew at our first committee meeting in January. Any final comments? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion carries. That item will be taken up in January, and we have no further business, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.